So yeah, basically just the idea that every single proverb, every single one of them, each one is a conceptual framework. So you have something like that that's talking about power relations. You understand? Here's an egg, here's a rock. The egg tries to wrestle with a rock. So then he uses this type of proverb to explain what's going on in the society. The next one about this. So every single adinkra, if you look at the adinkra symbols, every single one is a conceptual framework.
So much of framework for us to go borrowing.
Yeah.
We have so much resources to work with, but we still go borrowing.
Every kente, all of these things around us, every single one is a conceptual framework. And without. So now, that can be a conceptual framework of the use of silence in the society, what it means. Does it mean weakness or does it actually mean strength? Does it mean wisdom? What you understand? So now you can use that to analyze. That can be a whole chapter just based on that. So I'll actually recommend that you look at Dr. Namigne's thesis. Ask Dr. Namigne. Nambigne.
I don't know.
Edward.
Yeah, Edward.
Yeah.
The coordinator for the grad studies. He's right in the corner. And just ask him, to see his thesis, because when he told me about it, I hadn't read it before, but I said, now I definitely need to read this, because that's a model. This is what we're talking about. Right? Get this one back. Have we heard from Amici?
But I don't think he had problem with his computer. The whole hard disk got collapsed. So,
But the media is intact, but it's just that it's disconnected.
no, it got crashed. Like he couldn't use it anymore, and he has to buy it.
External or the internal
The
one?
internal factory.
Because it doesn't have the cover.
I don't know, he doesn't. So, it's a serious problem for him because you have to look for all other materials in my cabinet. The fortunate thing is that he's not alone in any of the class. So, he will be able to source them for me.
You have to back up your backups of your backups. I started doing that when I was doing my PhD because I did so much work on it. I said, if anything happens to this copy, I will never go back to the field and do all these things and write all. I said, I will just go home, sit down and sip some coconut somewhere. I will not do it. So I backed up to Dropbox, then I backed that back up to Google Drive. Every so often I would send an email to myself with it as an attachment.
That is very important. You do the emails.
So my writings, I have them in
sending
multiple
everything
places.
to email. Anything you do, let's put it on your email. It is safe.
Yeah. Because then you just do a search and then you can pull it back down. So be safe, have backup plans to your backup plans to back up your backup plans. Okay. So we're looking at creation stories, African concepts of creation. And here you see the depiction of Nu and Nonnet. So represented as masculine and feminine. So this is the primordial waters. The divinity is representing the primordial waters. And even in the primordial waters, we see this complementarity, this balance, right? So African creation accounts for primeval water, metaphor for the womb. Also looking at it as a life force which permeates everything. Everything evolved from this original material. So according to the Shabaka text, there's an animating force, and that is the Ba, the world soul, life force, soul or breath within each being. And all nature is endowed with an inherent life force potential. So if you have this chaos in this endless water, inside of that water is the potential for every single thing that will come out. Right? Now, recently, like, well, not all that recent, last year, I was looking at an article that was saying, there's this idea of the Big Bang.
Big Bang.
The Big Bang Theory. and it's basically the exact same thing that the Dogon talk about. Now, what they say is that in this teeny fraction of a second, you have more things that have gone on since everything put together. And at that time, it's before the formation of molecules or atoms or any of these things. And the way they described it was a plasma, right? So this plasma that they're talking about contain the possibilities for every single thing that comes out after that, right? And again, this is what the Dogon story talks about, this teeny egg. It's this tiniest thing that exists, right? And then everything came out from that tiny egg, exploded into what we now know as the universe. And now science is telling us the same thing, but now we see this relationship between this tiny egg and then Nun, the primordial waters, which you can think about as like a plasma that contains every single thing that can possibly exist. We'll come back to that point. So here is the idea of divinities and creation. So divinities are seen as spirit forces by which man and woman are able to call supernatural forces to assist in the ultimate life purpose, to realize one's destiny, right? So again, the African concept is a life-centered life rather than a worship-centered life. So if you look at the Eurasian religions, your whole purpose for being here is to praise some entity that's outside of you. Whereas here, the idea is that you are here with a purpose. That's your purpose for being here. Your interaction with other divinities and spirit forces is to assist you in fulfilling that purpose, right? So even if we have these divinities, my focus in life isn't I'm going to go and worship you, or I'm going to propitiate you, or all that. That is necessary to some degree in order to get assistance along your life path. If I can't understand things, let me go and ask you, and you are able to be the intermediary between me and everything that has ever existed, exists now, and never will exist, right? Also, there's an idea of a parallel between the personal and the cosmic. We saw that in the Dikenga, looking at the human being as a metaphor for the sun and vice versa, right? So the way my life works is the way the sun works. The way my life, the way creation came about for me out of the primordial womb, the primordial waters of my mother's womb, that's the same way all of creation, because all of these are just analogies. Even if we use terms like plasma, it's just an analogy for whatever that actually was. You understand?
Not exactly.
It's not exactly.
But it's just analogy. But it falls within the logic.
Right.
The same logic.
Right. So the myth of creation and cosmos are analogous to the creation of the human and vice versa, as we've just said. Social life is seen as being part of cosmology, the relationships between these different entities, human beings, similar to the relationships between stars, you understand, and other celestial phenomena. So you have this idea of as above, so below. So because all of these things above are orderly, then we need to make our life here on the earth orderly as well. So in this, creation was not seen as an event in the remote past, but a continually evolving process of transformation from one state to another. So we go all the way back from Nun, now Net, into this, into that, into Shu and Tefnut, into Geb and Nut, into Asar Set, into Nebet Hut and Sethet, into Heru, and so forth and so on. So again, creation is seen as an analogy. So each day is seen as a replay of the creation of the world. So in the beginning, there's darkness, and then eventually the sun comes into the darkness. That's what they talk about, Ra or Atum. All of these are just different aspects of the sun, which brings light. So when you hear other religions say, oh, let there be light, or you understand, all of that is coming from the original ones that predate them by thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? So also each life is seen as a replay of each day. So the way my life works is the same way every day works. And again, it comes down to this concept of going from the known to the unknown. If I know how this works, I can look at those principles and understand how that works. The image of the sun dispelling darkness is the image of the demiurge Ra, or Re, rising out of primordial waters to create the world. And because of the term Ra, it makes me look at different words for the sun in African languages. So we have Ra, there we have Oria in Chi. The name of the solar boat that the sun would sit on is called Ria in Medu Neter and ancient Kemet. So again, there's this correlation that requires further research to see, all right, is it just look-alike, or do they just look similar on the surface, or is there something more, to that? If you look at another word for the sun, Heru, in ancient Kemet, the word in Yoruba is Orun, right? So when you look at these allow you to develop a hypothesis, and then from the hypothesis, that's where you go deeper into see, is it something that systematically, every time I see this type of sound here, I see that type of sound there, then you can see it's not just happenstance. So Ra, or Re, rising out of primordial waters to create the world, and this mirrors the evolution of human consciousness. So think about, as a baby, you're experiencing all types of things, you're seeing all types of things. However, you may not remember every single thing from when you were a baby, right? You're 6 months old, and someone says, oh, do you remember that lady who came over wearing the red shirt when you were 6 months old? Maybe not. But you can picture, even now as an adult, that the people you don't know may just seem like primordial waters, right? You don't know them well, but now someone comes and they introduce themselves to you. From something that just looks like a huge chaotic mass, now there's order that's arising in there. That, oh, this is you? Okay, good to meet you, Ibrahim. Okay, wonderful. So now things are starting to take shape. You're rising out of this chaos of all the infinite possibilities to now be ordered in my life. Oh, you are the one who I know from Covaribia. Oh, you are, in the MPhil, program. Oh, you are this. So as our consciousness develops, it's like the transformations out of infinite possibilities into an orderly system. So Atum Ra in creation account is analogous to the development of the egg in amniotic fluid, or zygote as it's referred to the embryo, to the newborn with first sensations and emotions. Now this is profound because remember we were talking about the 1 becoming 2, the 2 becoming 4, 4 becoming 8, 16, so forth and so on. That this is what we know of cellular division. And this is exactly how the creation stories all throughout Africa go. That you have the 1 creator, and then from that creator comes 2, 4, 8, 16. And we talked about before divination on these binaries, 256 different possibilities coming out from it can either be this or that. I hope you're following along. So these are some of the things. So and then the analogy again is that as you start to develop sensations and emotions, this is like the development of your consciousness from infinite possibilities to now the orderliness of what actually exists. So ideas, and again you see this in all these different creation stories. We'll give actual examples of the creation stories where we want to get the foundations and understanding of what cuts across. So one is the idea of the universe organized by a demiurge, or divine intelligence from the chaos of primeval waters, right? This is something you see in the creation story after creation story. And every single African people has a creation story. And even when they look similar, you'll see that there's something that undergirds them, something similar about them. And usually it's something that has to do with a metaphor for the womb, right? Something along those lines. The person's destiny chosen from a chaos of possibilities by the spiritual double or destiny. You also have a mythical agent of chaos, the master of language, the keeper of the word, which you see in the Dogon story, a life force and ultimate knowledge, which we see in Ifa. However, greed leads to the denial of means to fully utilize the power of the word. You see this among the Dogon, again among what they refer to as Ogo, the master of the word who can't fully utilize the power of the word due to its greed. Every being is gifted with a mission, a destiny in the form of the word, right? So again, this is what existed in the beginning was the word, and you see this in the Bambara creation story. and we'll actually talk about that one a little bit later. So, and again, just logically speaking, I mentioned a proverb earlier today that it's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children. It's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children. Logically, right? Because how did you think you got here, right? Now, if we think about that, the people who've been on the planet for the longest, the oldest people on the planet are African people, by all accounts, right? So, if we know this to be the case, who do you think we should, excuse me, logically go to if we want to get a sense of what the creation story should be like? Right? There's something to consider. So, ideas of life on Earth, social conditioning, lack of development and greed can prevent individuals from fully realizing or manifesting their fullest potential. And again, this is everyone's purpose is to, have good character, to live a good and ethical life so that they can become an ancestor and have their names recited when we're calling libations, those types of things. However, if you are not living your life ethically and morally, is that the name that we'll call when we're pouring libations? Here was a drunk who killed and raped and murdered, and let's pour their libation. No. Do we want you to come back? No. Not like that. Our also Earth ancestors are central in sanctioning the laws of the human community. And you see this again all throughout the continent. Therefore, it's crucial to live in balance with the Earth in order to avoid retribution from nature in the form of natural events, floods, droughts, famine, pestilence, and so forth and so on. Now, last time we spoke a little bit about the rising levels of seawaters, right? As a result of global warming, all these things. So it's not something that's way off in this spooky something. It's that if you do this, it will result in this. Whether you say to yourself, I want this end result to happen, I want this effect to happen. If you've done those things, then by default, you said through your actions that you wanted this to take place. Now this is something that we would see as, oh, this is modern science that's telling us this, but this is the concept among all African people. If you do things that are in alignment, then things will go well. If you do things that are chaotic, then things may go in a way that you say, I didn't want it to happen. But all these things happen perfectly based on, in terms of the perfect effect for what the cause brought in. The human community is seen as an organic part of the earth on a micro scale and the supreme being on a macro scale. So Earth and Ma'at, we're talking about now looking at Kemet again. They represent central forces regulating spiritual, social, political, and economic organization. Kalamon ko dan leko. Ngole shenisi. Abumaro. Sorry about that. Ìyàwó mi, that's my wife. Okay, so the Earth and Ma'at representing central forces regulating the spiritual, social, political, and economic organization of societies. However, we also looked at colonialism, and you see this in the book where it talks about divorcing African people from the land and getting them into the monetary system, usually by stealing land and then guarding it with forts of guns. So now if you want to use your own land, you have to pay and rent to use your own land. Well, now what can you pay with? Well, now you have to join the monetary system, right? So all of these things are tied in together. However, it's seen as a possibility to reestablish the link with Ma'at and the earth as an organizing concept. In this type of system, there's an emphasis on balance, reciprocal, harmonious, orderly, appropriate, truthful, and just human relations and relationship with nature. And again, all of this is going to the core ideals of Ma'at. So as we look at divinity and nature, we'll look at ancient and traditional accounts of the beginning looking at Kemet, a few from there, the Bambara of Mali, Yoruba of Nigeria, Kuba of Zaire, what's now Congo DRC, Dogon of Mali. When the book was in its first printing, it was still Zaire, and that's why it's there in the book as that. The Dogon of Mali, the Fon of Benin, Igbo of Nigeria, Songye of Congo DRC again. So again, we're looking at a core worldview. Remember that the guiding conceptual framework is coming from the book of Coming Forth by Day, where it refers to Amen Ra as the one and only one who has no second, the one but with many arms. So we're using even that line from that text as the guiding principle, that even if we see these different peoples, that you can think about them as just different arms of the same ultimate worldview. Now, when we just see this arm is there and this arm is there, it looks disconnected. It's like, look at all these arms. I'm in a room full of arms, but you don't realize that these arms are connected to the same body, which is the African worldview. So you have widely varied yet common core elements that are discernible through all of these different creation stories. You have ideas of complementary comparative research method in order to provide a more complete picture rather than an atomic analysis. Now remember when we were talking about schizophrenia, that one of the core aspects of schizophrenia is that you look at teeny tiny things and you're not able to look at the whole context. So I'll say, oh, why does this look like it's worn off? What does this mean for my life? Oh, what should I do about this? Maybe I need to call my, you understand? If someone's doing that, you'll say they're crazy. Because they're taking something just tiny and trying to blow it up out of proportion, as opposed to saying, oh, it's just worn down because I've been wearing it for some time. That's what's going to happen. But if I start trying to abstract, oh, this must mean that I need to go and call my mother and find out if when she knows that I stole some candy when I was 5 years old, and you understand? But this thing that on an individual level we would call insane, when it comes to research, this is what we do oftentimes. We'll take a teeny tiny fragment and we'll blow it out of proportion, or not show how it relates in the context of the larger picture, right? Here are these people in this village, and this is what they do, and then they do this, and then they do this, and then it comes back to the, especially for African studies, the so what question. So what?
So, this is a problem we really encounter. Any other lecturer will speak, and then he asks you, what is it that you want to do? You will tell them you want to look at this, and then he said, okay. And then you start saying you want to do it in the African perspective. So no, just concentrate in Ghana, and not knowing that indeed when you do it Ghana, you are not going to even do general Ghana, maybe among the Krobos. And that is what people have been doing all this time. You wouldn't get it. But if you are able to do one thing and then it represents the whole Africa, it means you have done a good work, which is representing the view of Africa. It might not be exactly the same, but there are areas that they may look ahead. So because of the similarity, it is normal.
And it makes your work very unique, because no one else can even plagiarize you and say, I looked at Robo and I looked at Tanzania. Who in the world has done that? You understand? And then, you know, just in terms of what's referred to as the status quo, right, is the idea of just looking at different metrics, like we can see how University of Ghana is ranked in Africa, in the world, so forth and so on. We can see this is what we've been doing, and it's gotten us to this end result, which we say we don't necessarily like our position as it is now, but we know that taking these steps got us to our position. Even if that's a good thing, I think that perspective is already covered. Everyone is already doing that.
Yes.
Everyone is doing that, so that's covered. Now in research, you're supposed to be looking for the gaps. What have people not really dealt with? We know what doing this gets you to. Fine. This is a different perspective, right? Where will that lead us? You understand? It's an unknown, but it can't lead us to a worse place than where we are now that we complain about all the time. I hope you're following. So, it's just saying, all right, it's worth trying something different and then see what comes about from that. Because this one we already know what comes about from it. right? But we can see. Okay.
As if it is sometimes it is like laziness. I see it sometimes because we have a way of doing it, so we stick to that. Like the same way we run our country, we continue to run it and expect change. Hardly are we going to see that. So if we continue to do the same thing, we wouldn't change anything. And
Which is the point.
We are not going to excel. Because whatever you are copying, you can hardly do better than the original practitioner or the original person doing it. You cannot outsmart him. He will still be the yardstick to judge you. So it's like in a form of even colonizing you still, even your education.
The African proverbs, myths, all these other things have a way of getting us to get into the mind of our ancestors. Definitely they have great things that we're thinking about, which made them to put them in small units of thought.
And when I was reading about Jichi, only about the way he was arguing against this Herting, that Herting could not accept African as a philosophy, our traditional way as philosophy. And he said, okay, but what is it? And he made foolish of him by the same logic he understands. If they are not agreeing in all sense, it is therefore an indication that some were thinking differently. And what is how does that come about? It is the level of thinking. This one has said this, and this one has said this. No, I don't agree. That is why I'm doing it this way. It means the people are logical, and then they are also analytic. And these are basic of what we call critical thinking. And he said they weren't critical, but they were able to disagree. So where did it come from? And it's a very good argument by teaching. So I really feel that if we go this way, trying to use our own thing to come up, necessarily it will be loved. People will like to have the book because that is making it new. And Hafiz told me what your work, that was what made you the best of all the students at that particular time. So how come? Because you made something different from what all other students do. And if you are able to establish that, it becomes easy because you have a whole lot of material to do. Sometimes you read these things, you don't even get them.
No, you're supposed to.
Translates into a way of life.
Right.
It's not like you have the theory and then you have your life. It flows, it mixes. It's all one.
Yeah, absolutely. My PhD supervisor was actually the pro-vice chancellor at the time that I finished. And he was saying he wanted me to come to African studies because of, some of these theoretical issues and conceptual issues. Because to a large degree, and this isn't to talk about anybody else, but let's broaden it to the university in general, or Africa in general, or whatever, that we have a tendency, as it is now, to go to the village, what we were talking about before, Galamsey research. We get our theory from there, that's our excavator. We go to the village, we dig, we come back with the raw material, and then we give it back to them to publish in their journals. You understand? That's the Galamsey that's destroying our rivers, but our intellectual rivers, our intellectual streams of thought, right? This is the analogy. This is a framework that I'm giving you right now, just this analogy. So now I could write an article of what's happening to our rivers of thought, our streams of thought, due to the intellectual Galamsey that's going on. Actually, I'm going to write that. But again, just the thing of, if we already know what this yields us, let's just try something different. It's not like an amazing thing to do. It's just like, let's try something else. This is the critical thing. Everyone is going here, let's try something slightly different.
Just simple like that.
And even if this isn't the best thing in the world, at least through the experience, okay, we tried this now. Maybe we do go back to that. Right? Well, let's continue. So we look at Kemet as a representative of the Nile Valley, including traditions that originated further in the interior of Africa and passed through rather than originating there. Others may be independent of Nile Valley expressions, but with similar core elements manifesting from a shared worldview. Hey, Wabe. Hard drive. Your hard drive.
It's Christ, and I wanted to finish, so I have to change even the work I was doing to see what I can do today. What I tried now. My conclusion is not becoming nice and simple. I'm stopping coming for the class. When it goes out, I can ask the machine, forgive me, and then I don't complete what I'm working on.
Okay. Obviously.
That's it.
Nice. Now when you say me facho, when you say me facho, would be some yeah, wouldn't even say me na me facho. Okay. So again, we're coming into common elements that you find in creation stories from throughout the world. The emergence of the world from primeval water or matter or morass. When you say morass, it's like a marshy place. It's not completely water, it's not completely soil. It's this muddy type of thing. And again, this is what you have in different creation stories. The Kuba of Congo, like Unu, that's what they call Heliopolis. In their account, the creator or demiurge comes from primeval water and brings forth the world from the mouth. Among the Bambara, they talk about, now people have eaten Bambara beans, the Bambara, that's the name of a people in Mali. They talk about a voice that comes from the void, and the word materializes into the world.
That's the Bambara story.
That's the Bambara story. The word is seen as vibration in terms of the vibration of vocal cords. So the same way the word is created through vibration now, this means in the beginning, that vibration was the first thing, right? And we'll go into it more in depth. The primeval creative vibration of the Bambara, also the Dogon, they have the same thing in Mali. And we'll look at that. But then you'll see that in Kemet you have different creation stories. That's what you're talking about, different views on how creation is, but they are different elements of the same thing. Now again, we're talking about different arms that are connected to the same body, and you see them coexisting. So it's not a holy war. You said that Ptah is first, and we say that Asala is first, now we gotta fight. No. That would be as ridiculous as here's my right arm, here's my left arm, and now let's fight. And then I start beating myself up. If someone does that, you would say you are insane. What's wrong with you? But this is what we are now talking about, where you have certain African people, some are calling themselves Christians, some are calling them Muslims. Neither one is their own indigenous spiritual system, but they're doing this. They're beating each other up over someone's thing.
Seems like the two crocodiles that have the same stomach.
When the best will have been the right supporting the left, and the vice versa.
Benkum jani fan ni fan so jari benkum.
So that is the issue.
Yeah. Again, common elements you find throughout the continent, ideas of human beings or creation emerging in four primordial elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Remember in ancient Kemet, we're talking about 5,000 years ago, you have Shu and Tefnut, that's air and water. You have Geb and Nut, that's earth and fire. Fire associated with the sky, the sun, the stars, all of those. You have four cardinal directions, also occurring as 8 male-female twins, and it incorporates the doctrine of complements, duality, and twinness of being. Also the concept that the world we live it in by twos, right? So you have ideas among the Yoruba, because the original creation was seen as being twin. When they give birth to twins, it's seen as a great thing, because you're hearkening back to that original creation. The Igbo, they also think the beginning of the world was twins, but they say that time has passed, you're not supposed to do that anymore. So they also, in their time, they reviled twins. Now the same worldview is that the beginning was twins, but you have different reactions to that same fundamental worldview, right? Should we keep having twins, or should we not have twins anymore? Again, different takes.
This story is equally accepted within Islam.
Mhm.
Well, they were saying Adam being the first creation,
Mhm.
but they were together with Eve.
Mhm.
So they give birth and they were giving birth to twins.
Mhm. Mhm.
They keep giving birth to twins. So the twins argument still goes even in religion.
So this is what you get to, is that all of these Arabs are in the desert somewhere, right? Where are they getting these concepts from? Where are they getting these stories from? When they talk about Adam, the name of the creator in ancient Kemet 5,000 years ago was called Atum.
See,
Atum.
measure.
And from Atum came Shu and Tefnut, twins. From Atum. But Atum is not some man and pulling things from the rib. It's seen as having both all elements that are possible from creation. You understand? But we come back to this idea. I think it's a good point that you bring up, because what we have to come to is, where are they getting these ideas from? Are they just looking at sand in the desert and saying, let's just come up with something? Or did the daughter ask the mother, how did you give birth to children? Right? The oldest people on the planet Earth are African people. We come back to that. Among the Basonye, the idea of 8 primordial beings emerging from a creator as elements or powers of nature through the use of symbols: earth, water, fire, and air. These are common elements you find in creation stories all throughout the continent. And because of the centrality of 8, we'll look at the Dogon creation story also, this number 8. So now I'm building my house up at Mampong, and it's 8-sided to represent exactly what we're talking about here. So again, looking at original existence of the androgynous being containing both sexes, even primordial water exemplifies this. Now what we saw before is that even though the primordial water, we could see it as a metaphor for the womb, that even in that primordial water, let's try to get back to it. Yeah, we're going back. I just want you to see this image again. Even in the primordial water, you have both masculine and feminine in that water, right? So even though we talk about Nun, that inside of the water is both Nun and Naunet. So inside of all these things is the possibility to create masculine and feminine. Let's come back to where we were. So again, the original existence of an androgynous being containing both sexes, even primordial water, exemplifies this. Other common elements is that the primeval mother and father were separately or incarnate within a single being. So either the idea is that the original being has both masculine and feminine elements in the same being, or that there was an original mother and an original father that both came out together. Right? Because again, it's as we know the order of things exists now, Ma'at. So if we know the order now to create life, you require a male and a female. That means the beginning of the creation of life itself must have required both masculine and feminine. And however we're going to describe that is an analogy from what we know to exist now. The idea of the morass of earth mixed with water, as in the Yoruba, the Igbo, and Fon accounts. So there's a level of chaos in the beginning. There's a chaotic mixture organized and separated into land, water, land, seas, rivers, mountains, and hills. Now, there's the idea, I think we've shared this before, the idea that there's a little wisdom and foolishness, a little bit of foolishness and wisdom. That in this, what we're calling chaos, this chaotic mixture that existed in the beginning, was order, right? Because at that time it was very clear that everything is just one thing, right? Now, in this period in time that we're calling order, there's a little bit of chaos, because now, even though I'm coming from the same primordial water that you originally came from, billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of years ago, even to say years doesn't make any sense, because a year is just talking about how long it takes the earth to go around the sun. How is that a real measure of time before there's anything called an earth or a sun? hope you're following. African people, we're the ones who even came up with the concept of a year. 365 days in a year. That's coming from ancient Kemet. The very first calendar came from even further south, Nabta Playa. Right? But then at the same time, we can see, even though now this looks like a time of order, it's not clear that I'm made of the same thing as this or that. Or I should have respect for a dog. Why should I respect a dog? Why shouldn't I just chop that cow over there? You understand? But again, this time that looks like order, that element is what's chaotic about it. It's not clear that everything is one thing. It just looks different. Will we continue? Yeah.
Given the original elements out of the four elements came, can you look it to somebody who's talking about a big bang something? So can we relate to that original thing?
Well, when you look at the Dogon creation story, that's where they get their Big Bang idea from. So the Dogon creation story is just that. So we're going to look at examples of creation stories and see the commonalities that undergird all of them. Right? So the Dogon is less of water at the beginning, and it's more of in the beginning was a seed, and there was a vibration, a spinning motion, and out of that spinning motion came everything in 8 different parts. The 8th one was incomplete, and that's the Ogo one. So we'll actually look at those stories themselves. Right. But basically, Abrichi say, Bibia Abeba Abadada. Abrichi say, Bibia Abeba Abadada. Abrichi, that's a goat.
Good.
The goat says that everything that will come has already come. So the stories of Big Bang, whatever, you'll find it among African people going back thousands of years. And not only that, when they are wearing that mask, it represents what they say happens. Right?
So, look, if we look at the origin of man, and we're looking at it from the two, and then where do we place other things like birds? Okay, what we were doing something that they were already, like animals, like other animals who are not necessarily humans like ourselves. Maybe cow, sheep, crocodile, and the rest.
So, yeah, if you look at not only creation stories, but even what we refer to as Anansi stories or Ijapa stories, a lot of them have to do with how this creature ended up being the way it is. You understand? How it ended up that human beings don't have tails, but monkeys have tails. How it ended up that the tortoise has a cracked shell. How it ended up that this bird ends up making this sound. You understand? Again, it comes back to the central concept of transformation, right? Because some of them are even told like in a jovial manner, like it's just fun, ha ha. But at the core of even those things is this idea of transformation, right? Again, creation isn't something that happened way in the beginning and that was the end of creation, and now we're something else, and everything exists now as it always existed. That's not the African concept, because all of these stories tell you this came to be like this in this way. And again, it's the core African worldview, this idea of Kepra, this idea of becoming, transforming. And this is what we get from the creation story from Noon. So from Noon, you have a transformation that's taking place. From that transformation, you have other transformations that have taken place. So again, this is the idea that if you know how things work now, then you know how things work then. And you can abstract from that. So we'll actually look at some of the creation stories in the Kuba of Zaire, Congo DRC, that actually talk about the creation of birds, the creation of other aspects. But again, I want us to, even when we say creation, all of these terms have a lot of conceptual baggage. Because when we think of creation, we may think of the Eurasian concept of creation. That's something that happened way back then. Now we're no longer in creation. The African concept is creation is every day. If I have a child, that's creation. If I have new skin cells, that's creation. If I have a cut that heals, that's creation. All of these things are continuations of creation. right? So we'll actually look at some of the stories and how they explain this continuation. So among the Dogon, the Igbo, and the Yoruba accounts, they have a blacksmith with the role of drying up the primeval marshes or the morass. And the marsh and morass is again the mixture of earth-like elements and watery elements. They're all mixed together in like a marsh. So common elements, again, now we look at the faun. And among the faun, they have this chaotic soil-water mixture, which has a fragile stability which will collapse if not held by the spiraling coil and motion of the serpent of incarnation of the demiurge, Da, also known as Da Aido Pedo, right? Very similar to the one of ancient Kemet. And we also mentioned last class the idea of the end time, right? And the end is exactly like how the beginning was. There's nothing but noon, primordial water all over, right? And you have Atum and Asar that both appear as serpents, and they intertwine. You can picture this like how you think of DNA, a double helix, they intertwine in this. So the way all creation ends is the same way that creation starts from the faun perspective, which means that end time is actually the beginning time of the next creation. And then we'll go through for billions and billions and trillions and quadrillions of years. Then eventually we'll get back to another noon. Just like how a mother gives birth to a daughter. Right? And it continues on and on. If it continues. So the snake has its tail in its own mouth. The spiral motion is a motion of life, and the symbol echoed in the Dogon myth. So they're talking about this spiraling coil. And when you saw in the Eradi Nyankopon, I showed you the from the gold weight, that spiral, which is Nyankopon inside. This idea of a spiral having something to do with creation, which is the same thing we now get in science in terms of understanding how the galaxy moves, understanding how the solar system moves, understanding how all these things move, understanding how DNA moves in the spiraling motion, right? These help us to understand. But again, all of this isn't regarded as science. But then science comes back and says the exact same things, but they just use Greek words to say the same thing we've been saying for 5,000 years. So as long as you say it in Greek, now it's scientific.
So the question here is that, I don't know, the assignments, my work is about the IFA and the binary coding.
Okay.
So the idea is this, we are actually doing them, we have them. They have not taken time to systemize the system, to systemize the very things that we are doing and then giving them a standard, and this is what it is. And so somebody comes in and see that, oh, this is what they are doing, what it is. His thesis is, he finds out, this is it, then goes and then puts a label and makes it his own. And then denies our ability of actually doing that and that. He got his product as a result of observation or study of what we have done. So I think
That sounds like an interesting paper. I look forward to reading it. That's what you're doing your thought paper on?
Yeah, this one.
So I hope you're able to recover your thoughts, because the hard drive here hasn't crashed. But it sounds like an interesting lab. I would, to some degree, disagree about us not having it a standard and systematized, because if you look, especially like Ifa, that is very codified, very systematized, and there's a standard that before you can become a Babalawo, you have to know all of these, different verses. You can know above and beyond that, but there's a, bare standard that everyone has to know before you can be regarded as an actual Babalawo. And other creation stories, divination stories, or divination systems have similar things. So the Dogon, we looked at that one last time. We looked at the Bambara one, the Sand divination one. So even when we're looking at binary code, that was also the PC, also invented by a black person, Dr. Mark Dean, that all of that is ultimately traceable to the Sand divination that you have in areas like Mali, from there transferred into North Africa and so forth and so on. Yeah.
But if even it is, well, I mean the claim that it will not systematize it, will not systematize whatever, or will not even sanitize the whole thing. How are we able to have it now? It did exist because I don't think it was recreated. It was the same information that was collected, and then we have it. We didn't perhaps have it common. It has been hidden.
My
It
point
has
is,
been hidden.
we didn't make it known to everybody around. So it was like in some people.
Right.
That was the Babalawo.
It is the attempt to silence it. I think.
To some degree, I would disagree with that because I'll actually show you. Among the Yoruba, under the moonlight, they have what I call, Ojo Shupa. So Ojo Shupa, this is a collection of stories. All are Ifa stories that are told under the moonlight, and everyone learns these. So it's the same way we would do Anansi stories or even Ijakba stories among the Yoruba. That the premise is that Ojo Shupa, this is literally saying the face of the moon. So on the full moons, we'll come together and we'll start citing these things. So Oniloni Ibu. And these are things that people will learn. You'll learn it as a story. If you decide to go deeper into it, then you'll learn it there as well. This is a claim that's also been made of ancient Kemet. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Dr. Chikan Ba about it. He was saying, yeah, it's so secretive, it's so secretive. And I was thinking, there's a little openness and secrecy, there's a little secrecy and openness because here we're supposed to live in a democracy. However, to get knowledge, you have to come in and you have to pay your money at the university. And I was showing him a difference that if you look at here, so this is Kemet. These are my pictures from Kemet. Now, when you go there, there's writing on every inch of the wall, everywhere you go. So this is a place of higher learning, Ipetsu, right? So when you go there, all of the things that you need to know about creation stories, about life, about any historical events that have happened, they're all carved in stone here. Everyone comes to this place, right? It was the largest spiritual structure in the history of the entire world. Right now, it's been encroached upon by neighborhoods of Arabs who don't respect it or whatever. But this is what you see. So if you look at this, look at all the knowledge that you have written here. Now, unfortunately, the descendants of those who wrote it can't read it unless they come to my Medunetra class or someone else's. And it's studied at Oxford and Cambridge and Brown and all these places. So those are the ones who are reading it now. But I want you to look at this compared to the walls that we see now. And it really struck me when I came back to University of Ghana how secretive we are now compared to then. Because now, in order to even get into the library, are you a student? Someone even stopped me at our library because they were like, who's this guy? Are you a student here? No, I'm a research fellow. Okay, go ahead. Imagine if we, like the same way you see billboards, imagine if on those billboards you had notes about creation stories. You understand? The same way you have this thing at Okpongolo, this big, shining, bright thing that keeps changing colors. Imagine if you had concepts of what unites us as African people, right? Knowledge of the different multiple cells of the human being, and it's on a billboard somewhere on your way into town. That's democratization of knowledge.
Then it becomes a public.
Then
a real public, but when you have to pay so much money to get it. No, that was a question I wanted to ask yesterday. I don't have to.
Even I have a colleague here because when I do these classes, I'll record them and I'll put them online. And one of my colleagues says, "Oh well, that shouldn't be the case. Only people who pay should have access to this knowledge." This is in the time that we now talk about democracy and education should be this, that, and the third. So when I came back from Kemet, I was getting used to seeing knowledge everywhere because I'm reading what I see here, right? Jed Medu In Ure, Jed Medun in Ure, the words spoken by the female great one, and it goes through all of this referring to Bastet here, and then you just read the document.
So, no, which,
Yeah.
where in Egypt?
This is what they now call Luxor. In ancient times it was called Waset, and the temple itself is called Ipet Sut.
If this very thing is there now,
Is there now?
because I have been to Egypt and I've been to Giza,
Mm-hmm.
I have been to the museum, the one and the big one in the
Yeah.
center of the town,
Yeah.
close to that big hotel.
Yeah, the Egyptian museum.
Yeah, museum. I have been there,
Mhm.
but I didn't observe it.
So when you go to the temples, so if you go to what they now call the Valley of the Kings, if you go to any of the temples, this is the biggest temple. You have Ipet Sut, you have Ipet Resit. So this is the, Ipet Sut is saying the most select of all places. And Ipet Resit is saying the same, but now the southern one. You go there and all of those temples are still, not all of them, let me not say that, but many of the temples are still there. The ruins are still there. You can see some of the mortuary temples. You can go to the temple of Ramesu Kusama Rasa Tepenra, who they call Ramesses II.
Ramses.
The second,
Okay.
right? You can see that of Hatshepsut, Khenmet Amen. So you see all of these temples, and when you're there, and this is, we're going on a sidebar, but just to make this point, that what you'll see is writing all over everything. All of this is carved on, and it's public information that everyone should know. So the creation stories are there, historical events are there, abstract concepts are there, mathematical concepts, gauges, all of these things are here. And then compare that to what you see around yourself now. White walls. If you come in and you haven't paid your money, you're not going to learn anything. You won't have access to the books, but here, the books are right here on the stone. Min Keperu Ra, so I know exactly who this ruler is. What they call Tutmos III. Min Keperu Ra, Jehutimes.
So, Doc, how long did it take you to get the understanding of the hieroglyph?
I studied it in undergrad.
Undergrad.
Yeah, I studied it for 2 years in undergrad.
Where?
At Morehouse College in the United States. I actually had to study abroad to another college because they weren't offering it at Morehouse. It was Morris Brown, which has since been shut down. Even our concepts, so you see these red, white, and blue stars. Here's the red, here's the blue, here's the white. So you'll think that red, white, and blue and stars and stripes have something to do with America, but this is in the Holy of Holies in the temple to Amen. That's the same Amen that you say at the end of your prayers. So you'll say, oh, red, white, and blue, but you don't know that this is coming from an African. This is the colors of Kemet, the colors of Amen. Right? I don't know how well you can see that. But anyway, as you are talking about things that are secretive, certain things are, if you want to even use that term, hidden in plain sight because it's everywhere. You can't trip over anything without having to read a book. Right? And then you go to the Dogon, every single time they perform, if you understand what you're seeing, you'll get deep meaning. Right? If you see this long mask, all the way this high, you see them swing the mask around, it's talking about the period that it takes for, have Sirius A, Sirius B, the 60-year revolution to go around. That's what that movement of the mask is talking about. They're showing you it's out in public. But do you want to learn it yourself? You understand? Do you want to comprehend what you're looking at? But we can deal with that point further later on. And the reason why this came up, colleague Chika, Dr. Mba, he's new, he's in philosophy. He was saying that his father knew all types of medicines, snake bite medicine and this, that. He said, but me, I didn't learn it. And I was thinking, well, or I didn't think, I told him, I was like, well, you went off to college and university in South Africa here and these places, all these other places. The time that you went yet organically is time that you were not there, but you were learning something from someone else. about Hume and Hegel and Kant and Descartes and Aristotle and Socrates, all the time that you would have been learning the herbs, because I was giving an example up at Mampong, the guy who was building my house, we were just walking around and he was identifying every plant there and what it does. Because when you're sick, what else are you using? Right? So it's very democratic, and I don't even like to use the term because we're talking about Democritus. Again, how are you naming something after something that existed before there was anything called even a Greece, much less a Democritus? Right? But if you are just in that society, you will learn these things.
Yeah, we learn in my house. I mean, everyone knows some leaves, some herbs that are I mean, medicinal. Almost every African knows some. So if you concentrate, you know more.
Right.
There are people who specialize in them.
And there are people who say, I want to concentrate in this.
Yes.
There's some who say, I don't want to concentrate. You can't force me to concentrate in that. But there's a basic level that everyone, if you get sick, you know what to do.
No. If I'm sick,
Every plant is medicine.
Right.
Only we don't know.
Some don't, some do.
I,
Those who want to learn more would pursue that.
and
Some
some
people, when you tell them you are sick, they just walk in and get something, drink it, and it actually works.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder.
So, like malaria, if my children are sick, I'll go and pluck 2 herbs, 2 leaves. We don't go to any hospital. We don't take any injections, pills, any of those things. This leaf, they bathe in it, they drink it, finish. If you like, you can also breathe in the steam.
So what about if it is something other than what maybe you know? This one is malaria.
This is why we say obidambi, that one person depends on someone else. Because if it's something that I don't know how to handle, I have a whole network of other people. And this is why, you have this concept in African societies that is seen as being impolite for a young child to ask an elder, or etisane, especially like etisane. Like, it's seen that if you ask that person, it's like being a bit presumptuous, because even if the person says that, oh, mehonye, what as a child would you be able to do for that elder? That even if the elder doesn't know themselves, they can't access through their networks of relationships that they've built over time. Now, it's not every African society that has that, but there are some, like among the Akan, you're not supposed to walk up to an elder and say it's the same. You can greet for time of day greetings, the Yoruba is the same way. But again, if it's not, there's another proverb that that a human being is not like a palm tree that is self-sufficient. Its body meets its body literally. And the idea is, that it's the human being who counts. If I call money, money doesn't respond. If I call clothing, clothing doesn't respond. It's the human being that matters. So regardless of whatever else I have, it's these relationships with other people that will save me.
Oh, seriously? And now you just
That's exactly, the world is upside down in more ways.
We've gone overly material, and I've taken up something from others.
I even saw that on the back of a trotro not too long ago. Whereas the African concept, that's a very anti-African concept. They're using an African language to say something that's very fundamentally anti-African. Anti-African in the sense that it's harmful to African people. It's not originating from African people, nor is it beneficial to African people. So again, I gave you that matrix where you can actually see anything that comes across your path. You can look at it and evaluate it and say, is this African or is this actually anti-African? Rather than assuming that anything that you happen to see a continental African do is automatically African. That's a very ridiculous thing to do if we're supposed to be scholars, right? We have to have some way of evaluating. But we'll come back to any of these points if we like. So again, the spiral motion is the motion of life, and the symbol echoed in the Dogon myth. And I was just at NAFTI earlier. One of the PhD students, Sela Ajay, he has a class there on African philosophy. And we were looking at the movements of capoeira. It's an African combat science, Asakon Okosa. Now, in this, you have this same thing that when healers who are initiated into that combat science, in order to show the efficacy, that they will do these spiraling kicks, these spiraling moves. Again, it echoes this original spiraling, coiling motion that creation started off with. Again, you have the idea that the serpent is a symbol of immortality and continuity.
So the serpent is an evil thing.
Even when you look at that, if you look at this a creation story among they talk about the Busumru, that in the beginning you had a male and a female who came out of the earth, and they had a problem because every month the woman would bleed. They said, you know, there's something going on, so they decided to go to the Busumru River, and they called the python Inini out of the river, and they explained what their problem was. They said every month she bleeds, every month she bleeds. He says, no problem, I know what to do for it. So Inini went into the water, got a mouthful of water, and then came back and then sprayed it on the woman's belly. And from there he said, don't worry about it, you two lay down. When you lay down, she won't have this problem again. So they laid down, and then again, the next month she didn't bleed, but her belly got a little bit larger. The month after that, she didn't bleed again, but her belly got a little bit larger. 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. That during that entire time, her belly didn't bleed. And then eventually, do you know what happened?
She gave birth to a baby.
She gave birth. Now, the serpent is a metaphor for the phallus, the male principle, the penis, to make it very clear, right? So when we're talking about this demiurge, when we talk about the termite mound, when we talk about the sun coming into the primordial waters, all of those are different ways, euphemisms of talking about the phallus. That's what the serpent in all of these different creation stories represents. In all the creation stories, the water, the primeval water, the primordial water, the morass, all of those represent the womb. So again, if we know that the way things work now is the penis goes into the womb, and then the spiral comes out, and then a baby comes, that's how we know how things work back then. So their creation story, this is among the Asante de Busumru, is based on how you know things work now. So from there, they came to an understanding the way to stop this bleeding that she has is by this process that the python, which represents the penis, the phallus, was able to teach them. So when they talk about the demiurge, again, this is talking about the urge that a man would have to procreate, right? But there's a complement to it. If the man alone procreates, that's not procreation. That's anti-creation, right? Or male and male, that's not going to create life. Female and female, that's not going to create life. The way to create life is masculine and feminine coming together. So if we know that's how life is created now, then we know that's how life was created in the beginning. Alright? So yeah, the serpent isn't evil, neither is their original sin, all these things. But they got this idea of a serpent representing this beginning of creation from the African thing, but now they flipped it to say it's evil. So now if everyone is already born evil, the only way to stop being evil or be less evil is by going through them and paying them money every single Sunday. Alright? But we continue. So the idea of the serpent as a symbol, let's come back. The serpent as a symbol of immortality and continuity. Also the serpent as a symbol of the life force in this form of a spiral and a coil. So if you see how serpents move, right, around trees or even on the ground in this type of life force. And then we get the same thing in modern science, and then they call it DNA. And we say, wow, that's amazing. Where did you come up with that from? Again, it's a silly daughter who tries to teach her mother how to bear children. Again, common elements, the primeval chaos exists and is organized into a sustained order. The order as it is now is the order as it was then. You have an interplay of the complements of order and chaos. So chaos isn't bad, neither is order good, nor vice versa. Now imagine if you were saying, well, order is good, therefore chaos is bad all the time.
How do you know what are the good and
This is the thing. And then by the same token, it would be just as ridiculous to say, well, chaos is good and order is bad. You understand? It's all about what's the context, what's the situation. And then for you, you may decide, I think that that's beneficial, or I don't think that's beneficial. But because of your subjective judgments, it is what it is. Also, agents of organization, often there's a counter agent working to destabilize the orderly evolution of the universe. But that counter agent is not the same as a devil. It's not the same thing as always evil. Issue. Right? You see the S with a dot under it in Yoruba says sh sound. Creation is an ongoing phenomenon rather than a discrete event of the remote past. Organization and counter-organization constitute the nature of the cycle of life, development and progress, conflict and disorganization, reorganization and resolution, redevelopment and progress, right? So all of these things fit together. Without this one is incomplete, and vice versa. We continue. Also, there's the idea of a cycle of life. We saw it in Dikenga, right? Right? That shows the evolution of the universe on a cosmic scale is a reflection of the evolution of a human being, or the evolution of a story, or the evolution of this university, or the evolution of this country, the evolution of your phone, or the evolution of your eye, or the evolution of anything. Because among the Bakongo, they say nothing exists that does not follow these steps of the Dikenga. They say every single thing that exists follows these steps. This camera followed that step. It was conceived as an idea. It came to its birth, is now being used. Eventually it will become obsolete. And then it will be transformed into the parts that it came from. Now, if that takes 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years, it won't take that long. At some point in time, something that used to be this camera will be a little grain of dust somewhere. Right? Everything transforms. And no one will think this grain of dust used to be recording for Dr. Kambon's class. Because they'll say, what is a Dr. Kambon? And they probably won't be speaking it in English either. The cycle is seen as an ascending spiral in the development of a person. And again, we see this in modern stories of the role of DNA in the development of living beings. Direct parallel, because among the Dogon, they say it's a double helix. A double helix is like a ladder, but it's twisted, spinning. That's how they say that the creation proceeded. And this is the exact same way DNA is described as a double helix that spirals. A conflict of identity and life leads to a reassessment of direction and purpose. So if you get to a point where you're like, what am I living for? I don't know what I'm here for. That sometimes that will make you reassess. So that is a chaotic time for you. You don't like that time. But in order to get to a more orderly time, you may need to go through these chaotic aspects or chaotic stages of life, right? When the conflict is resolved, it's a move to progress until the next conflict and resolution. And this is what you see with rites of passage, right? You come to a point and then you transition. Come to a point, you transition. You come to a point, you transition until you transform and you leave this plane, and then you transition until you come back to this plane, right? And again, it's looking at it as akin to an ascending spiral symbol, returning to the same point at a higher level of experience and understanding. In the Yoruba myth, you have order brought to the process by Ifa, the all-knowing divine intelligence. Then you have destabilization by Ishu, the principle of uncertainty who demands sacrifices before doing his duty. Even to say his duty is not correct, because in Yoruba it's a gender-neutral pronoun. Nkonto yakoshi, o is the same thing as o in Chi. Right? So again, you saw on the Ifa board that I brought before, you
That no matter what happens, I'm going to do for good.
But you have to necessarily teach them away because of the environment, because they grow into it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to see if we can play that one. So at the end of it, I'm trying to play it even with myself. This week, the week started, especially about school and issues in African government, because of 6, where the this one. It was like, oh, the week is too this thing. So right from Friday, it was like hard work. I was trying to make sure I said, look, this week I will make it very fit. And then make sure I am able to come it and make it part of my life throughout the rest of the semester so that the course probability is that's what I told you. So I start to work on it. Then the computer, there's a lot of the things that I do. I read the articles highlighted and did some small notes. But that's writing and I'm hoping that I want to cover up a lot of them. Then when the days run, I want to run into the week proper. If it is Tuesday, then Monday evening after Monday's when just have read them and highlighted them. Just go to the highlight, pick the main things that I did, do the one. And then the next time also crashes. When it crashes, the next thing that I have to do, okay, now I don't remember the thing that I highlighted. So what do I do? I have to go and get the whole new thing and then increase the rate at which I have to keep waking. So I was just thinking about it. When I was counting, I told myself, at least I think it has gingered me to understand that I can stay up to 12 a.m. because
I'm sure what you are saying, apart one thing clearly that you have learned, you will now think of backing up. The backup thing, you would have learned it. So we will do it. That is one of the good that is
one of the good that come out of
this.
this.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
also knowing that, oh, at least I can stay week out to 12.
But sincerely, what I got from last week is the fact of proper arrangement. It was a push and there was this thing to write, all other things. So I had a very good plan because it was too much for me. The 6 articles and then we presented that paper. So we were writing about this one, that one, everywhere. There was a whole lot of work. And we were also to meet the Usman now. So it was a whole lot of. I think when it was too tough, you rather get more strong.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
You become very strong.
And
Your power pump, man, I saw your power pump, man, I saw coming.
Oh, okay. But at the same time, you can't cheat nature.
No, but seriously, me, I have cheated my nature.
You have cheated.
Yeah.
For
Let me
instance,
tell
she was
you,
talking about staying up till midnight.
I did more than that. I did more than that.
So what
So
you can't-
what
Remember that the
What
causes will have effects.
Yes.
No,
Whether
I
you
know.
like them or not,
What
go ahead.
happened to me was I planned coming to this to the seminar. Because I have overly stressed myself the previous day and then the night before I came to this. So when you know what happened? When I came to this seminar and the seminar and we closed, I just tried to go to another seminar at the modern language department. They were doing it, the Arabic people, so I have interest in it. I went and I was listening. But knowing that I will come to this class, I started losing. So the nature that I failed to cheat there was the right to go and sleep. I went and slept and sacrificed that particular one. So that when I come here, I will be
And you're doing well today. I can see you took your nap.
So because of
The Arabs will not be happy with you about that
But
decision.
I left. It was a very good. The guy did so well. He presented a case on some aspect of Arabic grammar and in this thing, Shi'ar. That is Shi'ar, Arabic poetry. He did that and he analyzed it so well. Some of the verbs and then the structures he used, the grammar.
Are you remember what he did or what you remember from your dream?
No, I didn't. Before I start dozing, I left.
Okay.
So I realized it will only not be fair for me to be there because it will affect my real class. So I left them and went. So when you are in a serious situation of stress, you get stronger.
And that's what I'm saying. I think
That's
programs
the good.
strengthens you. If you don't give up, it strengthens You realize you overcome it and then you have strength to do like that. So I think this thing has been trying to run into our case. We didn't know it's going to
So there's a proverb, we mentioned it before, Bonina Papa Frimuba. Bonina Papa Frimuba. And that's from the inside of what looks like badness, or something good comes about. You know, you'll say, oh, it's so bad that my dog died. So your dog dies, you bury the dog, but then on that spot comes up a mango tree. If the dog didn't die, then the mango tree wouldn't have gotten the nutrients that it needs to, you know, grow. Just that as a hypothetical situation. But you can understand, bibi say, bibi ye. One thing doesn't spoil another thing. So from your perspective, if you are the dog, you're like, I don't want to die. But in a much larger scheme of things, you know, these things are always transforming. The dog is now a mango somewhere. I hope you're following along. So it's just what's your perspective? The things are going to happen the way they happen, but what's your perspective on it? Right? Because you are the one who changes with regard to how you see it. What level of consciousness do you have about these transformations that are going to happen either way? You like them, you don't like them, they're going to happen. How do you understand them? So we continue. The Dogon agent of disorganization, principle of chance, accident, and uncertainty. Ogo disorganizes creation, we mentioned. Disorder rectified by sacrifice to redistribute and reorganize, we mentioned all this. So the death of the savior motif was plagiarized by Eurasian mythology and religion. Agent of disorganization, chaos apparent, seems to be an apparent nuisance to the established order. However, it is necessary. Disorganization and reorganization leads to renewal and enrichment of the world. So you can say the time where that did not happen was in that teeny tiny seed that the Dogon talked about. Nothing changed, it was just there, right? Or you can even say no, inside of all this changes, it just no. But you have a major transformation where it's Ra or Atum Ra that comes up into that primordial water, or you have, you know, the split, the spiral motion where it comes out and becomes what we now refer to as the Big Bang. So disorganization is not equated with Eurasian notions of the devil or the essence of evil. There's a difference between evil and accident. Accident can be fortunate or unfortunate, right? And that too may also come down to your perspective. If you lost the 50 Ghana cedis, you say, it's so unfortunate that I lost my 50 Ghana cedis. The one who picks up the 50 Ghana cedis is saying, oh, it's so fortunate that I found the 50 Ghana cedis. Now I can take care of my mother this month, right? Does anyone know who this African is? He looks a bit like Rev.
And this is clearly no one. They don't mean any particular person.
It is a particular person.
It's a particular person. That is kind of a statue or something.
It's a statue of that particular person. Long before Ramesu Usama it's a king of ancient Kemet. Which one?
Pharaoh.
Ramesses is a pharaoh.
I'm
I
sure the
know
name we
Ramses,
don't
they
know.
call him Ramses.
Ramesses
Pharaoh is a
is a title.
title that's coming from the name of a building.
From the name, yes.
The name we do not
It's
know.
a stool name.
If you say Ramesu, that's actually the Sarah name. So it's a birth name. A birth name. So you have other throne names, you have other. So when you say Usa Ma'adwa Setepen Ra, you're talking about other throne names that come about after the fact. And he had more than any other ruler in the entire history of Kemet. However, this is not Ramesu. Should I help you out?
Yes.
in unison in one voice. Yes, this is the founder of Kemet, Narmer, the founder of Kemet.
So when it was 640
The very first ruler. So that is to say, this is the very first ruler of the very first nation state. in the history of the world. Anyone read that for me? Oh, how can you be in the university and be illiterate?
You didn't know our own language.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know.
okay.
Should
Should I help ask
You
what I
can
was?
see some fish.
This is Nar, this is Mer, Narmer. That's his name?
No.
Nar, Mer.
No, no.
So Nar is a
I have this
catfish,
friend.
and then Mer. Go ahead.
I have this friend on Facebook. Normal. And he's, I don't know, maybe he was he's the person. He calls our current system the most educated people, and the uneducated people are the, he said, Intraboma. He uses an African name, Intraboma, and then almost about an hour come, he will give a version of the traditional African historical thing, which is better than what we think we're talking about. And he calls himself Name, which is this spelled N-A-R-N-E-R. So this is the answer.
So that's the name of the first ruler of Kemet. Unified Kemet, because before that you had disparate, smaller, what you could call
What?
territorial states.
Are you the one who was talking about?
Say again?
So how do
What was I the one who was talking about? Or
Um,
that was later.
Oh, at the end of his talk, he mentioned when
That was the last time.
last time. He mentioned something about Kemet, and he mentioned the work of Aikuyama. I think he did mention Nama.
Yeah.
I think he did mention Nama, the unification of Kemet under Nama. And this is who you're looking at.
so Lama? How is it? N-A-M-E.
N-A-R-N-E-R.
This is how you write it.
That's how it is written in the ancient language.
The fish is Nile.
Na. And the chisel is Mer.
But how right we are now? This is problematic.
It's difficult.
No problem. We'll work our way to that. So ancient Kemet, land of black people. So now we're looking at the actual creation stories. We've given the similar elements. Now we'll look at the actual one. So the one from Ilnu, this is how you write Ilnu. This is Iln, this is Nu, and this is letting you know it's a place. The pyramid and coffin text from the 5th dynasty, the book of knowing the forms of existence of Ra and killing Apipi the snake. So we're talking about 4,500 years ago or so. Words of Nebuchadnezzar. This is how you write Neb-er-jer. Neb-er-jer. And this is also a phonetic complement. Form of Keperu. So remember we were talking about the sun at birth, at sunrise is Keperu. So it's talking about this is at the beginning. The creator of what came into being, and what came into being came forth from the mouth of Nebuchadnezzar. Now when you say Nebuchadnezzar, what you're saying, they translate this as the Lord all the way up to the limit. So Jer is talking about the limit. So it means of everything, right? So at that point in time, heaven did not exist, earth did not exist, and raised out of Nu, the primeval abyss of water from inactivity, right? And in the text, it refers to, again, this coming of Nu, that Nebuchadnezzar found no place to stand and worked a charm on Nebuchadnezzar's own heart and laid a foundation in Ma'at. So the very foundation of all creation is Ma'at, truth. So anything, all of these, so anything that isn't truthful is not going to last. Only that which is true is going to last. So I laid a foundation in Ma'at and made every attribute alone, had not yet spread out Shu or Tefnut. No other existed who worked with me. Made a foundation in heart of own will, and there came a multitude of things. Now, what's interesting about this, and we mentioned this before, is that if you look at how the solar system was created, right? You're talking about, I think we talked about this, we have all this gas that comes together, eventually ignite. Oh, you all weren't there? Okay, yeah. But basically the idea is that all of these things that eventually become planets and moons and whatever, that you start off with all of this gas. When the gas starts to collapse, this tiny molecule of gas comes together with this molecule of gas, then it has a little bit of gravitational pull. It pulls in 2 other molecules of gas. Those pull in 4, those pull in 8, those pull in 16. It keeps coming until you have this huge mass of gas where it is so much gravitational pull that this atom and this atom can't move anymore. And what happens is that the gravity forces them in on each other. And when they do, that's what's called fusion. We have these atoms that fuse, that's nuclear fusion, and that is the birth of a star, right? So basically what you're dealing with is that any of that excess gas, if there's enough excess gas, then that excess gas can collapse on itself and form another star. If there's not enough, then there's just enough to create what we would refer to as planets, right? So it comes together, congeals, but there's not enough to set off this nuclear fusion. Then it becomes like what we're on right now, the Earth, or Jupiter, or Mars, or so forth and so on. Now the idea is that from Atum Ra, the sun, basically it's saying that it spat out Shu and Tefnut, and then from there Geb and Nut and so forth and so on. The idea is that anything that doesn't become part of the star, the sun, it now becomes all of these other aspects of creation, which is what actually happens. Or at least now science is saying the exact same thing that our creation stories have been saying for 4,500 years. Right? But they say everyone is made out of stardust. This is what we're talking about. Atum is an aspect of the sun. Made a foundation in heart of own will, and there came a multitude of things. Again, from Nu, from one power became 3, from out of self came into being. So Shu and Tefnut raised up from inert watery mass, unified members and wept over them. Men and women came from the tears, came forth from plants, all creeping things. So this is where you're coming into birds and other things. So Shu and Tefnut gave birth to Geb and Nut.
So men and women from the tears.
Right. Right. And again, we're talking about the tears of the sun. So what we're saying is that the same thing that the sun is made out of is the same thing that men and women are made out of. Which is actually, I don't know if you all got a chance to see when Mfundishi came, but he went through the breakdown of what the human body is made out of. Made out of nitrogen, made out of oxygen, made out of all these elements that we see in other aspects, including, helium, all these other elements. So again, anything that doesn't end up becoming part of the sun ends up becoming what we are. So it's a metaphorical way of saying this is what we are made out of, this is how we came about. And now they'll tell us the same thing, just use Greek terms to say it. To say, oh wow, that's magic. We're so glad that you discovered this. So Geb and Nut gave birth to Uzziah, Eru, Setech, Aset, Nebathut, and one birth. We mentioned this before, the key divinities, right? Shu, Tef, Nut, Geb, Nut, Uzziah, Aset, Nebathut, Setech, Eru. And then this is what that's actually depicted in the book of Coming Forth by Day. So you see out of Nun, the primordial waters, you have these divinities rising, and then Kephra, right, which is the dung beetle rolling the sun. And then also this idea of this spiral, right? Remember we showed you the snake with its tail in its own mouth. That what you see here, let me see if I make this bigger for you. What you see is a person whose feet are touching the back of their own head. So this is a person, the head is upside down. This is the body, it comes around, and then the feet come and make contact with the back of the head. The idea is that the beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning. So we have different ways of representing the same thing. We could represent it by a serpent. We could represent it in this form. But all of this is showing you a little bit of the deep thought of African people. This is a short video that I saw online that goes through similar things.
Nu was the name of the dark swirling chaos before the beginning of time. Out of these waters rose Atum. He created himself using his thoughts and the sheer force of his will. He created a hill, for there was nowhere he could stand. Atum was alone in the world. He was neither male nor female, and he had one all-seeing eye that could roam the universe.
Now, I want to pause because it says Atum was neither male nor female, but they keep using the word he. This is a deficiency of the English language. I was giving you an example before when we talked about Mao Lisa. Mao being feminine, Lisa being masculine. Well, anytime you talk about Mao Lisa using the word he did this, he did that, this is a deficiency when you're coming from a Eurasian worldview.
His shadow to produce a son and a daughter. Atum gave birth to his son by spitting him out. He named him Shu and made him god of the air. Atum vomited out his daughter. He named her Tefnut and made her the goddess of mist and moisture. Shu and Tefnut were given the task of separating the chaos into principles of law, order, and stability. The chaos was divided into light and dark and set into place. This order was called Ma'at, which formed the principles of life for all time. Ma'at was a feather. It was light and pure. Shu and Tefnut produced Jeb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. At first, these two were tangled together as one. Shu, god of the air, pushed Nut up into the heavens. There she would remain, arched out over Jeb, her mate. They longed to be together, but in the name of Ma'at, they had to be apart to fulfill their functions. Nut produced rain for Jeb, and Jeb made things grow on earth. As the sky, she gave birth to the sun every night before dawn, and by day it would follow its course over the earth and die at sunset. Shu and Tefnut produced the other gods. Isis, the queen of the gods. Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty. Osiris, the god of wisdom and justice. Seth, the god of evil. Thoth, the god of wisdom. And Nephthys, the protectress of the dead. But the chaos was still vast and not yet fully separated into the order of Ma'at. Shu and Tefnut once got lost in the dark waters of Nu. Atum was desperate to find his children. He sent his all-seeing eyes throughout the heavens and earth to search for them. In time, Shu and Tefnut returned with the eyes. When Atum saw them again, he was so delighted that he wept tears of joy. As these tears hit the earth, they became the first men. As the men populated the earth, they had to uphold the truth and balance of Ma'at. They had the task of tending the earth and worshipping the gods. The gods, in turn, protected and loved their creations.
That's basically just an animated summary of what we just been discussing. So this is Asar.
So we can get to the link and be able to get the other.
Yeah. So then we also, oh, Ibrahim. Sorry.
Nature is taking.
It's taking its toll on me.
The perfect effect, whether I like it or not. So we also have the Chimnu version. So we're talking about 2686 to 2520 BCE. So from this one, it talks about primeval waters of chaos, 8 original elements or ancestors, 4 original pairs of male-female twins, arose summoned by the voice of divine intelligence. Jehuti, whose female counterpart was Ma'at, representing the principle of operation of natural law.
This one, Atum changes to Djibouti.
So here, Atum, in different localities, you have different Necheru who take central foci. So in some places, you'll see that Ptah has a more central role, and we'll come to one with that. And another one, you'll see Khanum has a more central role. And another one, you'll see Jehuti has a more central role. So it really depends. But again, when we look at it in the context of one and only one who has no second, one but with multiple arms, these are just different perspectives and different ways of describing the same phenomenon that we're looking at. So in Ilnu, you see the central role for Atum Ra. Here in Chimnu, what they call Hermopolis, you see a central role of Jehuti and Ma'at. Right? So representing a principle of operation of natural law. And this is very similar to the Dogon one. It is very similar to the 8 sides of my house that I'm building. So you have male halves, Nun, He, Kek, also called Kuk sometimes, and Amun. Female halves, Naunet, so these match. Hehet, these match. Keket, these match. Amun and Amunet, these match. Emerge as female snakes. So these ones as male frogs, these ones as female snakes. You'll see a similar thing when we look at the Dogon, when they talk about the Nomo, who are like amphibious, not quite, they're seen as being like serpents, being like amphibians, but then also being made out of liquid and light. So these 8 appear on a mound of earth rising out of the primeval waters of chaos. They create an egg from which comes forth Ra, the sun power to fashion humankind and give order to creation. Right? And then we have Min Nefer. This is what's called the Shabaka text. And here you see is Shabaka, right? Looks a bit like Amici. Alright, the Shabaka text, 750 BCE. So again, you have the common element of primeval waters, but you have a different central role for a different divinity, one from that locality. So if I'm from this place, then my divinity will play a more central role, but it's all just different aspects of the same thing. If I want to focus on the creator as being metaphorically like a potter, right, then I may look at Khanum as a central role. If I want to look at the creator more, like the one who spat out something, then I'll focus on Atum. If I want to focus on the creator, so it depends on which aspect, what metaphor do I choose. And you can again think about each one of these creation stories as a conceptual framework. You have an analogy that you're extending in order to explain how things came to be. So out of the primeval waters of chaos arose one being, Ptah. So Ptah Chenen. So this is Ptah. This is a Ptah Chenen. And then this lets you know it's a divinity who was a creator and also the primeval anthill, the mound of earth rising out of waters. So the primeval anthill story is very similar to what you find in the Dogon, later Yoruba, right? This sand or earth that's spread throughout to make the earth. Ptah, both the primeval father and Ptah Nun, and primeval mother, Ptah Naunet. So again, in the same being, you have masculine and feminine, because otherwise, how can you create life? So this is again in Men Nefer, what they call Memphis. The city of Memphis comes from the word min, nefer. Min translates to establishment or institution, and then nefer translates to beauty, nefer. So a beautiful establishment. It embodied the 8 powers or divinities within him/herself. Atum, thought, Hor, the heart, and Jehuti, the tongue. Ptah's creation of the world conceived by thought of his heart. Again, his isn't the best way if we have both masculine and feminine, but the English language has not yet developed to the point where it can handle something like this. And uttered into reality by his tongue through the power of the word. So in the beginning was the word of Ptah. Right?
John 1:1, Reverend.
What's that?
John 1:1.
Who's John 1:1?
In the beginning was the word.
Oh, are you saying that someone else took that same idea?
Yeah, I think I was reading the Greek sources of the African, is it the sources of Greek philosophy, the African source of Greek philosophy. Then I got about relations to
Stolen legacy.
I've forgotten the
Okay.
book I was reading. But I got to that story, I saw the immortal water, then came out one and then brought out other 8. And so the number became 9. And they said the first one that came out, and then they said the scoop way out of the water, scoop the way. And then I understand, well, this is Christian into, this is John 1:1. So there I remember. I have learned to see what John 1:1. The word was important, the word was God. Pardon?
You say,
Can you hear me?
I heard, but the latter.
I said in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and the word was God. And all that came into existence, came out of him, and now without the word, nothing was existing that exists.
So you'll find this all throughout the continent, but again, the mother came before the daughter. So we're talking about the very first spiritual text in the history of the entire world, over 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. When it first appears in the pyramid text is like what I showed you before. Every single square millimeter of the entire inside of the pyramid has writing on it that goes into these creation stories, but it goes into them already in full force. So it's discussing things like it's mentioning Ptah, it's mentioning Atum, it's mentioning these things. So there had to have been at the very least hundreds of years, if not thousands of years of development before you just come up and you have an entire text of everything, enough to fill the inside of a whole pyramid. Actually, let me see if I can show you what I mean.
These texts are there before we had our religions.
In fact,
These things existed before the countries that those religions came from even existed.
That is the issue.
But still, we are using the new to judge the old.
But
So
this
then
is
you
why
ask yourself why.
We are asking questions, and this is why we have to be asking more questions.
Well, who do you ask? We are already indoctrinated to believe in.
Oh, no, but you have archaeology, you have all these sciences that can guide you,
Because I'm saying, who do you ask?
No, you can't ask, but you can study.
So you are learning for yourself and educating others. But most of those whom you would ask,
Take research. You look at people's research. You see, because like even not too long ago, they discovered some texts, and some scripture texts, ancient texts, in some caves.
So look at this. This is the inside of the pyramid of Winis. This is the first of them. All of this is writing. And this is the oldest spiritual text in the history of the world that I've mentioned to you several times. The ideas of death and resurrection of the Savior are there. The ideas of Judgment Day are there. All of the things that form the core of the plagiarized religions are found here.
plagiarize.
All the plagiarized religions are found here. Now, this is the oldest one we have, but to even start off with this, it means you had to have at least hundreds, if not thousands of years before you can produce this product. But this is the oldest one that survives that we have access to. So anytime you want to get to what's the first occurrence of a word in Kemet, what you'll do is you'll go to these pyramid texts. Anytime you want to know what's the first occurrence of a concept in Kemet, you go to these, because this is the oldest compendium of spiritual texts anywhere in the history of the entire planet Earth. Before Bhagavad Gita, before whatever you want, before any of these, of course before Bible and Quran. That's like saying last week.
Yeah, that's
But you see, when you come to think of the world and the way it goes round, and some parts go under the sea, the formation. So it's also possible that there may have been some places before this. I mean, the geological turning around of the world. You get my point?
Yeah.
yes.
So yes, this is the oldest, but there could have been. Also.
Not there could have been, there was, because we also talked about the Sahara. It wasn't always a desert, and we have to start thinking about how much of our history as Black people, as African people, is buried under sand. So I have a colleague, actually a former tree student of mine. He gave a talk not too long ago, where he showed the cranium found in the area of what's now Lake Chad, dated to 7 million years old. So, we have what they call Dinknesh. This is 3.5 million. You have Ardipithecus, that's 4 million. You have even older than that.
Yeah.
Now, even in terms of modern human beings, modern Homo sapiens sapiens, we talked about Morocco and what's now desert territory, that every 41,000 years, you have a shift between the Sahara as a desert and then lush vegetation, desert, lush vegetation, desert. So that means that process happened 7 times since 300,000 years ago. There were 7 of those cycles, full complete cycles from that time. This means that people moved out into the Sahara. They were building, they were doing all types of things, making history, living, loving, playing, eating, drinking, doing all those things. When it became a desert, we came back to where we are now, modern Ghana, to the Nile Valley, to Congo, to all these places. That happened 7 times only in what we now know as modern human beings. Much less you have to now calculate for how many times it happened since that 7 million year old skull. So it's not maybe, this is definitely, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of this. If we're looking at something that we have access to that we can read, this is as far back as we go. But the future of scholarship is going to be.
And the person even can be, the analogy can be done from this one, making the regression. How did we get this one?
Exactly.
So if we had this one 6,000 years, how did they know this?
So
Right.
this could have also been under the sea.
Exactly. So
Also under the sea.
Yeah.
So it's
This is now the research, because this is the oldest spiritual text that we can
We
read
can reach,
and that we have access to. But again, this is, if you're interested in archaeology whatsoever, you have billions of tons of sand, right? These huge sand dunes. If you go under them, you will no doubt find towns and cities. Our
Under
prof.
the sea. National
Right.
Geographic.
Right.
Those who go under the sea and try to study, they say things that you can find is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Especially element.
So again,
maybe we have to build a shrine.
look at the writing of this. Every single teeny tiny crevice is written upon. Every single teeny, and the alignment is perfect. If you look at how this is done, the alignment of all these things are perfect. Each word is in a line, in a row. Look at this. In columns. And you can read this. I've actually read this from beginning to end, the pyramid text. From beginning to end. And I got halfway through the coffin text. I have to finish that one. But the coffin text is basically another take on this. This is the original one, the coffin text. To some degree, carry forth the same ideas, but then to some degree they expound slightly differently on these. Now this one is, you'll get it at about 1,000 pages or so, and it's not an easy read per se, but it's worth it because you'll find out where all of these concepts come from. Even ideas of Dikenga, even ideas of the world that we're in, that the world of the ancestors is inverted. You find those first ideas here in the pyramid text. You find them even more articulated in what they call the coffin text, which are reproductions of these ones, but now for people who could afford to have them reprinted inside of their coffins, right? And then later on in the book of Coming Forth by Day, it's those who could afford to just get a book written that has reprints of these things that were originally in the pyramid text. So you see a progression, and then you see different ideas. In the pyramid text, the idea is that the afterworld is up in the stars, right? These imperishable stars. So if those stars never set, they're always there, then we want our ruler to go and join those stars and intercede on our behalf. And then later on, you have a much stronger idea of the underworld, the Duat. All of us get buried, we're all going there. So even though you still have this talk of the imperishable stars, there's now a shift, even though those ideas were before, but an underworld and so forth, to now this is more prominent. Everyone going to set in the West, right? These types of things. But yeah, let's continue to what we're dealing with. So now we're looking at the Bambara creation story. And this is Chiwara. So in the Bambara creation story, you'll also see something familiar if you're interested in the word. I hope you all read this one too. So in the Bambara creation story of Mali, they say creation came from Fu, which is a void, right? Again, the womb, you can picture this as metaphorically like the womb. By the action of Gla. Now you ask, well, what is Gla? Gla is the creating but uncreated principle, a fundamental movement of the cosmos, and all that therein is a principle of continuous creation. The creating but uncreated principle of continuous creation.
So self-existing.
The snake's tail is in its mouth. So you have Gla inside of this void. Gla uttered a voice from the void, creating its double Dia. Right? So the beginning of creation is Gla. It was full of emptiness, and its emptiness was full of itself, that it uttered a voice. Dia! And then from that, now not only Gla is there, but also Gla's voice is out there. So now you have two. So from the one now becomes two. This endowed life with a dialectical force. From there you had Zo and Yo. So Zo is human consciousness and Yo is purposive thought. So the one became two, the two became four. And these came from Gla Dia, which is a combination of Gla and Dia. From these, the universe was ordered and took shape. So when we now have stories of cellular division, right? Cellular division, how one cell splits into two, the two splits into four, the four split into eight. You see the prominence of eight in these creation stories, right?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the reproduction of Arriba. How it is it sexless? But then continue to exist, and then like cell division, it multiplies and stuff like that. Just thinking about the moon. Out of moon came a dog. So I was thinking the dog behaving like Arriba, where it disintegrates itself to the other part. Does any relation?
You know, interestingly, there's a documentary series. I look at a lot of documentaries, you know, I'm like the film guy. And there's one that goes into different elements. It goes into air, water, how these different elements shaped our life on Earth. And one of the things that it goes into is that the first organisms you can actually go to on the coast of Australia and see them growing on rocks, but it's these single cell organisms that exist in colonies of trillions. So if you look at it, it's just like, it looks like sludge on the thing. But the point they were making is that all living creatures on the earth now are descendants of this little sludge, right? So you have just different variations, different transformations in order to go from single cell to multiple cell, go from multiple cell to now organizing on different levels. So you can picture this as Noon. You can picture Noon as the order and organization that comes about from all these things. So basically what we're looking at is everything, all of these things we're discussing, you can see them as analogies for each other, metaphors for each other. If I know how a child works, then I know how an amoeba works, and I know how all of creation works, and I know how a star is formed, and I know how this is. You understand? So when you're actually knowing yourself, you're knowing that all these things are just different ways of thinking of what is ultimately one thing. Right? Just different arms. So in another version of the Bambara creation story, and this goes into what was being discussed before, of the critical thought is that not everyone is saying the exact same thing. Right? So again from the Bambara, they say Miri came from the bosom of Yereti. In Miri was Wali, execution, and in execution there was Tali, the coming of things. Four things define four fundamental elements of creation: air, earth, fire, and water. Is that familiar from anywhere?
Yeah.
Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut. Right? Air and fire are male, earth and water are female. Right? Now, if all you've read are the Greeks, then you'll think the Greeks came up with this idea. But that means you haven't gone back 5,000 years to find out before there was anything called a Greece. This was part of our creation story. So you can go there and read it right now.
Even the present day Africans, it's not because we are in Ghana, Accra people, we don't know what the Malians think about it. At least ask them. So I think there is a huge covering of a lot of knowledge and virtue of considering we're supposed to spread the two dominant knowledge about creation. Islam, Christianity, is our people. So therefore, when you are among the thousand or whatever, you never know how the creation story of your own indigenous people is.
What about the migration? The migration of people definitely will bring about the hospitalization. That definitely will bring about some people getting to know the creation stories of other people. So I think I want to counter what you are saying a bit, in the sense that a creation story, let's say about the money, and that's where actually ancient Ghana came from. And so as they migrate, then you can trace these roots of trade.
For me, I will see both of what you said as complements as opposed to counter arguments, because you have both. One, you have people who have migrated, but then after you have certain spatial distance and temporal distance where they're no longer interacting, but their creation stories may still have these similar elements. So even if they can't say, oh, we came from here, even where, we were looking at, myself and another colleague, we were looking at proverbs from Akan proverbs and comparing them with Swahili proverbs from Tanzania. So think about how far, modern day Ghana is from modern day Tanzania. However, you have a similarity just in terms of we have a similar worldview. So even if I'm cut off from these, even if we came from the same source, because we see things as similar in similar ways, we'll produce similar things. If you look at the stories, the Ijapa tales and the Anansi stories, you'll see these similarities, even though the Akans are not under the Yoruba are not under the Akan. It doesn't preclude, the sharing. But now let's look at a difference between those who have a similar worldview versus those who don't have a similar worldview. Because we've been exposed to Hansel and Gretel, but you don't find that permeating all of society, and now this is given as an Anansi story. You understand? Of the Wicked Witch of the West or whatever, all these things. So even if you're exposed to a story that has a completely different type of worldview, that one will permeate less, it will saturate the society less, to the point where you see the same story among the Akan and the Yoruba, where the Yoruba one is so Yoruba that you'll say they couldn't have got it from the Akan, because there are all these elements. They're talking about Orisha, and they're talking about this, they're talking about that. Then you'll look at the Akan and say they couldn't have got it from the Yoruba, because they're talking about Aye and this and that, all these things that are very, very kind of, but if you have a similar worldview, it helps you to either we came from the same source, or yes, we did come from the same source, but we've been apart so long, but because we have a similar worldview, we'll come up with similar products. So if you are Yoruba, you give birth to a child, that child comes out black. If I'm Akan, I'll give birth to a child, that child comes out black. This is our products. They look similar to some degree. You understand? Because ultimately we came from the same ancestor. Now I didn't need to consult with you per se to create my black child, and you didn't necessarily have to consult with me to create my black child. We may have, because due to migration, an Akan woman and a Yoruba man may actually come together. But all of these, I think, are different perspectives that will help us see the whole thing. Let's continue. So Yoruba creation out of Nigeria, what we now know as modern day Nigeria. And there was a series that came out where a photographer decided to represent these Orisha through photography. So this is Olorun, which is the creator of the universe, as seen through a photographer's lens. No land in the beginning, only space and sky, endless water and wild marshes far below. Does that ring a bell? The domain of water.
This is with the
Yoruba, and Olorun was the creator. It literally translates to the owner of the sky. That's the word Olorun. There's also the word Olodumare, which translates to owner of all of the universe, owner of creation. And Leda is better as owner of creation. So no solid land in the beginning, only space and sky, endless water and wild marshes far below. Domain of water or the sea divinity Olokun. So you have Olorun, the owner of the sky, and Olokun, the owner of the ocean. So where this starts off is basically at the point where in ancient Kemet we would say you had Shu, you had Tefnut. Shu represents air, and then Tefnut represents moisture or water. And this is where we're starting. Olorun or Olodumare was supreme in the sky. Other Orisha had powers, but none were more powerful or knowledgeable than Olorun. You had Orunmila and Ifa, the oldest son of Olorun, could read the future, understand the secret of existence and divine processes of fate. There was the Orisha Obatala. Now in some creation stories among the Yoruba, especially the more recent ones, and let me not assign a period to it, but you have, instead of Obatala, you have this role being played by Oduduwa. And Oduduwa is said to be the progenitor of Yoruba people. I think this is a more recent one because what it does is that if Oduduwa was there present at creation, it means that the Yoruba are the oldest people. But in the one that I became familiar with first is Obatala, and I'll give you this one. So the Orisha Obatala was trusted like a son. You had Eshu representing chance and unpredictability. All the Orisha were happy in the sky except Obatala due to untapped creativity. And Obatala was very creative but was unhappy with the wet monotony. There's nothing but endless water down below. There was no inspiration of any living thing in sight. So Olorun gave Obatala permission to create land with advice and guidance from Ifa Orunmila using 16 Merindilogun palm nuts. Obatala descended on a gold chain carrying a small snail shell, a white hen, a black cat, and a palm nut as advised, because all of these elements would be useful in creation. Obatala got gold from other Orisha and descended on a hook. Ifa instructed Obatala to use sand, then use the hen to spread it, which became land, hills, and valleys. Obatala walked, built a house in the place where he landed called Ife. Now this is referring to Ile-Ife in what's now modern day Nigeria. And the word effect, it comes from the root verb fe, which is to spread. And the idea is that this is the center and everything spread out from where the hen spread the sand. From there, Obatala planted the palm nut and a tree sprung forth. Obatala began to make and mold people from clay. This is what you see in another creation story of Kemet of Khanum, which said that all human beings are made out of this black soil, out of this clay, this silt at the edge of the Nile. So made people from clay, drank palm wine, and after drinking palm wine, he didn't make the clay figure so well. He started to make cripples, those who weren't complete, those who had a leg missing, an arm missing. When he finally came to from his drunken stupor, he swore off of palm wine and became a protector of cripples, right? So you have people who have Obatala in their household who don't drink any palm wine, in reference to this creation story. Again, in the Yoruba creation,
But
Mhm.
I feel on the body. And see,
you know what, Orun? So all of this is coming. So these were given by Oludumare, the creator of all creation, right? So what Obatala created were human beings and on the earth. However, previously in the sky, you have the creator, you have Ifa, you have other Orisha who are able to, donate and give gold, give the elements that would be needed and necessary. So you have everything that's necessary for creation already in existence, and in a sense, you can look at that sky as being similar to Num. All the possibilities of creation are already in existence, but now it's yet to be ordered as we know it here on earth. So Obatala got gold, of course. Where are you getting it? All of this is going on in the sky from other Orisha descended on a hook. I think we mentioned this. The palm nut, the hen, so forth and so on. All of this was already there. And it's similar in this sense to the one of the Akan creation stories of Abrewan Nima. The idea that in the beginning, the sky was so close to human beings that you could get everything you needed just from the sky. You can just reach up and get everything. But of course, from pounding fufu, it makes the sky go further. You try to make a tower to get closer to the supreme being, the tower collapses, and some people are crippled, injured, some people die. And the realization is that you can only become one with the Creator through transforming, transitioning, dying, in that sense. So again, this idea is there. All the potential of creation is already there. It's just to give form and order to it. So Obatala tilled the land with wood and a copper bush knife. This is before the coming of iron. There's another Orisha who's responsible for iron called Ogun, and that's a later step in the development. Obatala went back to Orun, that's the skies. Olokun, the owner of the ocean, was unhappy because before there was nothing but ocean, but now the ocean has ceded some of its territory to now what has become earth or land. So Olokun created floods to reclaim land and drown many. So if you want to know where your flood stories come from, it's coming from here. You found that there's a similar one in Kemet as well, the destruction of mankind from a flood. If you're interested in where that came from, it came before there was anything called an Israel or a Rome or a Greece or any of those things. Ishu took a sacrifice before sending word to Obatala of what was going on with these floods, and consulted with Ifa, who used knowledge to dry the marshes and turn back the flood waters. Ifa didn't want to stay on earth, and so taught the Orisha and men the arts and sciences of controlling unseen forces and the art and science of divination, which we covered last week, right? Through this binary divination. So this stretches back to soon after the beginning of creation. In the earthly order, relationships between people and nature and people and the Orisha began taking shape. Olokun, and this is a modern, wanted to humiliate Olorun with a weaving contest. This is where it gets interesting, right? So Olorun sent Agema. Agema is the word for a chameleon. And Agema looked at the cloth that Olokun, that's the owner of the ocean, pulled out and kept changing to match it. So Olokun, you see all of her splendid colors that she has underneath the ocean. So anytime she pulls out this blue color, Agema looks at it and says, ah, then his body turns that exact same color. She pulls out a green color, Agema looks at it and says, ah, and then turns that exact same green color. So Olokun said, wow, if I can't even beat your messenger, how can I beat Olong? Okay, you win. This is how Olong was able to use wisdom in order to obtain the earth and land. So Olokun acknowledged Olong's greatness. So the Kuba, people of Bushongo in Congo DRC, they're very famous for the cloth that they wear that's called Kuba cloth, made out of raffia, made out of natural, things in the environment. Now to get just a square of it, you can get some for hundreds of dollars, hundreds of pounds, thousands of dollars to get like a longer one. And these are the things that we'll say is primitive. Right? That's a sidebar. So in the beginning there was darkness and nothing but water on earth. Does that sound familiar? Right? You have Bumba the Chimbe reigned alone. Bumba, a huge man, white in color. Now, we were talking about before, however, our world is, the opposite world must be the opposite. So if you are talking about the underworld, if we're all up here walking upright, then they must all be inverted. So just to give you a concept of where this is coming from. Pains in the stomach caused him to vomit moon and the stars. Water ran off the sand and left it dry. No vegetation or animal life. Bumba vomited Koi Bumba the leopard, Pongo Bumba the crested eagle, Ganda Bumba the crocodile, Yo Bumba the little fish, Kono Bumba the tortoise, Chichi Bumba the thunderbolt, Yanyi Bumba the white heron, a scarab, and a goat. After vomiting one man white in color called Loko Yima, the creatures above produce all others that fill the world. So again, it comes into this idea of transformation. If you start off with only these, from the combinations of these, you get everything else. Again, it's the idea that the way things are now isn't how they've always been. Things have transformed and morphed to what we now know. You have Nyonye Ngana, the son of Bumba, who vomited white ants and died. Again, you keep seeing this whiteness of what's coming from that realm, the inverse of what our realm is like. You had Chonganda, another son who vomited a plant, which was the parent of all vegetation. A third son vomited kites, the bird kites. King Bumba made Loko Yima god upon earth and ascended into heaven. And that's their creation story. The main similarity we saw is at the beginning, this idea of nothing but water, right? Other things as well. Now, one of the Dogon creation stories in Mali, in the beginning you had Ama, existed in the form of an egg divided into 4 parts representing the 4 elements. Kize Nai, and the Nai is the same thing, you have the word Nine and P, right? Kize Nai, things 4. D, water. Ono, air. Yao, fire. Minne, earth. All fundamental elements already existed in the egg in embryo form. 2, in the egg, Amma designed the world before it was created. So inside of this teeny egg, you have Amma creating what everything is going to be like. In the embryo form, all things existed as a thought in the mind of Amma before coming into existence. Water was used to design the world. And this harkens back to what we learned about Kemet before. Everything existed in the form of a sign or a symbol in the mind of Amma. Every created thing has a sign or series of signs as a thought in the mind of Amma. Altogether 266 signs, and these are combined in various ways to make up all things in the world. So this is the first creation. Before this world, Amma created the first world with a seed called Sene. Amma was experimenting with all elements in a spinning cap of primeval germs, all the potentials of what would later develop. This was the basis of future life, however it was imperfect. That was the first creation. So the creator can do things that are not going to work out as even Amma hoped. Imperfect, but there's a little perfection in what's imperfect. There's a little imperfection in what's perfect. Because he/she, Amma, got the exact effect of what the input was, right? the water was thrown out of the mixture as the spinning cap exploded. Right? Remember you were talking about Big Bang? Water was the most basic. Remember we were talking about the plasma existing in the teeny tiny fractions of a second right after creation. So water was at most basic. And this abandoned the first attempt, and Amma decided to make a second, but kept that sinning seed for later. So now the second creation, Amma decided to use the smallest of all seeds, the Po, which is the Po inside of the primordial egg. That's Amma's womb. So Amma isn't fully masculine or fully feminine because Amma has a womb, like a female, but then also has a phallus, like a male. Amma created thoughts, Bumo, which had not yet formed an image. These thoughts were identified with 266 original signs. That's why we do divination as it's done, based on what things were like in creation. They undergo development to greater stages of reality. Yala, the image, Tonu, the drawing, and Toi, the completed thing. So you have different steps along these. The exact correspondence to 266 signs with each thought in Amma's womb. It shows a number essential in creation of the universe. Amma kizemana dunone tile vogole lugologi. The thing. Right. So the thing that Amma created that he/she sent into the world, that is what one has counted. Now when you
because Kamaru didn't want to use he or she,
he did, except when it got to be too much.
he took it out and then put Kama into brackets.
Right. Right. And again, you can look at these things again as we understand the human is developed. You can picture like the DNA as the image, which then develops into the zygote and then eventually develops into the completed thing. So you can see these steps along the lines of creation. Everything in the universe was assigned a number through being allotted a number of signs. In the creation of Po, this is the inside egg of the world. Amma created a spiraling motion. At the center created the Po. Again, we saw this in the Aradin Yonkopon. You saw this in Abodia Santain. You saw this idea of creation as a spiraling motion. You saw this in the creation story of the Fawn people. This serpent that's going in a spiraling motion. The Po was oval but invisible. It existed as an oval but it was invisible. It was the smallest created thing. And this is seen as being what we now call the star called Sirius. So they say that where you see the star of Sirius, that's where creation started. And they call it Potolo. Potolo. The smallest created thing. And Amma's will was inside that tiny seed. When the Po seed spun inside the egg, it scattered particles of matter in the egg in an explosion of sound and light, which was invisible and inaudible. Did you get that? An explosion of sound and light that was invisible and inaudible. The explosion was not a word, but a thought. The explosion was not a word, but a thought. So you were asking about the Big Bang. I said, we're coming there. Yeah. You'll come to where they got the Big Bang from. You continue? So the Po image of the beginning of all matter. So if you want to know, according to the Dogon, where all of creation, where the Big Bang occurred, they can point to the place in the sky where the Big Bang occurred. And it's right where you see Sirius. If you're not clear, if you look at the constellation of Orion, you'll see 3 stars. Those 3 stars point to what looks like the brightest star that you'll see. That's where it is. So if you look at that creation story, then also look at the idea of the Supreme Being moving away from Abrewa Nenema. Abrewa Nenema is also the name of a constellation called the Pleiades. The Pleiades, right? The Pleiades, Pleides, if I got that right. So the Pleiades is a constellation. So That constellation is called Abrewaninima in Chi. So for them to say that the Supreme Being moved away from Abrewaninima, that we ourselves are part of that Supreme Being that moved away from where that constellation is right now. You understand? So we'll see it as we're here on Earth and then the Supreme Being moved away from us, as opposed to if you understand the constellations that are being referred to, then Abrewaninima is still where it was. We, on the other hand, have moved away from that, so we are that part of the Supreme Being who moved away from that original place where creation took place. I hope you're following along. So again, according to the Dogon, the Po image is the beginning of all matter. Amma created all things in likeness of Po. All things come from Po. All things came from this infinitely tiny thing. This is the exact same thing the Big Bang is talking about, but they use the word Po. Amma created the world by adding infinitely small and identical things together until eventually large things were created out of them. This is what science now tells us about the atom as a basic building block. But then you have even smaller elements, smaller than the atom. You have, electrons, you have protons, you have neutrons, you have neutrinos, you have dark energy, you have dark matter. Right? Now this brings up the idea of the microcosm and the macrocosm, as above, so below. So the idea that if you get as big as you can possibly imagine, the furthest light that's ever traveled out, you keep going, eventually you'll get to a place where you'll find out that you're inside something that's as tiny as an atom. Right? Or go the other way. If you go into that atom, you'll go down teeny tiny as far as you can get, and then inside of that tiny atom you'll see something that to those who are inside the atom looks like an entire universe. Because it's talking about Amma created the whole universe inside of this egg. And then inside of the egg was Po. I hope you're following along. So not only are things like this, you can also think about how they expand out like fractals. When we're talking about fractals, the same thing you see on a large scale is what you start seeing on a smaller scale, then see on a smaller scale, then see on a smaller scale. Infinity small and then infinity big. If you get big enough, you'll loop. If you get small enough, you'll loop. But we continue. And then the loop is the Dikenga. But we continue. Amma created the world, I mentioned that. There were 4 elements that were placed inside: air, fire, earth, and water. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Now, if we looked at this creation story and then looked at someone else, they all look different. Because one is talking about crocodiles. This one doesn't mention crocodiles at all. These people are talking about this. These people are talking about fish. It all looks different. But once you... Very good. Finish your sentence.
There's always a basic element that all of them are. So, as you rightly said, it is the central role that is given to individual deities or powers, and then different names and associated to different things. That's what matters. But at the end of it, all of them come from the same base. Basically 4 elements is running from ancient chemistry.
Exactly.
Traditional.
Exactly. But we're told that that was discovered in Greece by the people who came to Kemet to study.
Yeah.
All they had to do was hear the creation story to come with that. Because it dates back to the very oldest text that we even have. And even before that, as I'm sure we can look at. Each extended germs to its neighbor, so mixing of elements occurred, right? So you start combining even at that stage. Mixing took place in the center of Po Pilu, and Po was eventually made invisible. Life was located in the center of Po as a conical spiral, right? A spiral that's like a cone. It just keeps spiraling out like a cone. This is what we're talking about. When life increases, it increases by whirling. That imitates how Amma came out of the egg of the world. Remember we talked about Akom dancing? There's a spiraling motion to align all of your different cells. When you move into a spiral, that's how your cells get aligned. in capoeira, the movements they call volta al mundo, you go around the circle. The spinning kicks, all of these things are to imitate how the original creation was. The mixing of elements cause vibrations, resonances, and evidence of the divine word of Amma. The word formed the life of the seed. So all of this is still in the beginning, was the word. And this is what that Big Bang looked like, these vibrations that came out eventually from the central one. And it came out as 8, 7 that were complete, and then 1 that was incomplete. So resonances developed as 7 vibrations, number signifying the union of masculine number 3 and feminine number 4, which added together signify future multiplication of beings. Again, it requires both masculine and feminine to create. The vibrations developed like a 7-pointed star around the central nucleus. The shape prefigured the form of human beings and future creation. The 7th vibration, which is what you see here, pierced the wall of the seed and ejected part of itself, creating an 8th segment, and this marks the beginning of the creation of human beings. So we're made out of that part that pierced. The 8 segments form the first living beings, including the supreme being Amma. The 9 form the Ennead of the Dogon cosmology. So you had Amma, then you had those 8 vibrations. Now, if you look at ancient Kemet, they talk about these 9 primordial divinities called the Ennead. So you have 8 in some locations, but then in other locations they talk about the 9. Right? Amma had, and basically what we see is that these are all different perspectives. If you describe the camera, you describe the camera, you describe the camera, I describe the camera, and we compile all of those together into one document, we get a much fuller view of what this camera actually looks like. Because if I'm only describing it, you'll hear about lenses and a little puffy thing pointing at me. If you describe it, you'll describe the screen on this side. If you describe it, you'll describe the port, which I can't see, where the card goes in. If you describe it, you'll describe where it says this on the back, right? So this is what we're coming at. So the Dogon story, to some degree, it complements the story that we have in Kemet, and those complement the ones we have from the Yoruba. All of those add in to give you a much more profound and complete insight about these metaphors that we're using to understand the unknown by what we know about the known. So Amma had purposefully created the 8th as incomplete so that all things would be contained in nature, completeness and incompleteness, perfection as well as imperfection. So completeness is not complete unless there's something that's incomplete. How can you be complete unless incompleteness is there? You say, oh, I'm complete because I have completeness. Well, where's your incompleteness? You're not complete yet. Right? So at a later stage of creation, Amma created moisture to complement dryness, infertility to complement fertility, death to complement life, and so forth and so on. And
So
again,
here, death, and so here is going through what the African system, and death is in the back door. It is part of the process to keep the creation
it's just transformation.
transformation.
Yeah, very good. And if you
Fear
think,
of, for the fear of death, many of us are unable to actually do what we can do because we are afraid we will die.
so because you're afraid of death, you don't live.
We don't live with that.
Yeah.
But then death itself isn't bad.
It's not something to be feared. If you don't fear waiting, then you can't fear death. Because once you transform, you'll just transform into something else, and it may just be a while before you get back to being something that you want to be again. But if you're not afraid of being patient, then you can't be afraid of death. Because all of these have a very long time span. So Amma then created 8 seeds, which evolved from the spiral of life inside Po. Then we come to the creation of the Nomo. From the Po seed, Amma created a double placenta, within which there are 8 primeval water spirits or nomo. Now, nomo translates to cause someone to drink, and it's the same that we have in chi, nom, nom. Now, interestingly, when you say nom, there's a glottal stop there, and linguists interpret that glottal stop is actually a truncation of another vowel that was there at some point in time, which is thought to be an O sound. So nomo as to drink, and it's just shortened.
The Gans also Italian connection.
There may be a connection there, but I don't speak God well enough to tell you. I can just only Greek. But yeah, so this is one thing that we can see these correlations in the basic words. We saw 4, 9 as 9. You see nomo as nom. And this is the other thing, that other vowel comes out when you have a consonant, specific consonants that come after it. So if I say nom, no. Nom, no. So if I say nom, no ye, like drink it well, I don't know when I would say that, but just to say I want to say that. Nom, no ye. So you can't just go from nom to the no. There's something that comes out. Nom, no. Nom, no. Nom, no. Nom, no ye. So it's the phonetic realization of an underlying form that just truncated when it's manom, manom, manom. Right? There we go. So Amma created a double placenta within which are 8 primeval water spirits or nomo, immortal also like their creator. There's a future role of nomo anagono, which was prefigured. The first nomo die, manifests as a sky power, dispensing rainstorms and lightning and creating rainbows. 4 lines of colors denote the 4 races of humans. And we saw this in ancient Kemet, where you have these 4 races of humans. You have the Kemetiu, which are the black people of Kemet proper. You have the Nehesiu, which is the black people in the interior of Africa. You have the Amu, which are what we now refer to as southwestern Eurasians. And then you have the Chimhu, which are the Eurasians who had already invaded into northern Africa. So the Dogon creation again, the nomos form is a snake, if you recall that from all these other ones talking about the serpent at the beginning, which is a symbol of immortality. Remember the snake with its tail in its own mouth. The second nomo titi yanye, the messenger of the nomo, is the executioner and sacrifices the first nomo in order to bring about reorganization. The third nomo, onomo, will be sacrificed for reorganization of the universe as atonement for the deeds of the twin brother. This nomo will resurrect in the human form and descend to earth in an ark. So death and resurrection of the Savior. You saw it in ancient Kemet, you see it again here among the nomo. The fourth nomo is Ogo, who will, by terrible deed of incest, create disorganization in the universe. Right? Now there's a book called Yurugu, where the author looks at the creation of white people, white Eurasians, as being analogous to the creation of Ogo. Right? The name of the book is Yurugu. And again, she's looking at our own conceptual frameworks in order to describe social relations in modern times. And then Ogo's revolt. Amma created 4 male Nomo Anagono twins and intended to create female counterparts 60 periods after formation. Now remember, Series A, Series B, there's a 60-year revolution period for Series B to go around Series A. Right? So 60 periods after formation. However, Amma's plans were disrupted by Ogo, who was impatient to possess his female twin.
So first, males are produced, they are created, and then the females are supposed to be both are.
Because these are twins, complementary twins. Right? Amma's plans, however, were disrupted by Ogo, impatient to possess his female twin. And then what he did is he tore his way out of the placenta, taking piece of it with him. Ogo traveled in search of the secrets of Amma's creation in order to equal Amma's power. Now this is especially why Dr. Muremba Ani looks at this as a metaphor for white people, because if you look at they're testing in genetics, GMOs, and all these things. It's basically attempting to get the secrets of creation in order to do it for themselves.
So, I was
Mhm.
looking at something. I was reading this technology, not engineering, but biological engineering. So I asked myself, yes, our countries are not moving forward. We are not producing sufficient to feed ourselves. There's some people who are doing this. But the basic question I ask myself is that we have a lot of people who are not working.
Mhm.
We are thinking about technologies that will take away the work of 1,000 people and give it to only 2 people. And then we are encouraged also to protect the environment. So if we sit on the agenda of uncontrollable consumption, by producing so much to few people, to feed everybody, to tell everybody that that's to make prices go down. What happens to the people who lose their job? How do they even get in down to buy the cheaper prices? And by anywhere, are we able to even exhaust everybody in the production with the natural giving of seeds to feed ourselves? That we have to look at changing the genetic modes of other ones to create another thing to say, oh, we are boosting production. I've been asking myself, what's the thing?
This is good. Give me a 5. For thinking. For thinking. What, as you are articulating, what you're showing is that you're thinking about some of these things, and these are exactly the things that you should be thinking of. When you're looking at GMOs, again, so we're dealing with trying to imitate creation and things like this.
The Ugo guy coming bringing this.
Right. So you have, ADM, you have Monsanto, which was purchased by Bayer, so forth and so on. You have actual cases in India. I actually read news articles about how farmers are starting to kill themselves after these suicide seeds were introduced, because what they did is they said we have a patent on this genetic code of this seed. So if our pollen blows off of our farm onto your farm, we now own all of your crops. That's copyright infringement. I hope you're following. Then they also have these suicide seeds. This means that these are seeds that cannot reproduce themselves. So every year you have to do what? You have to come back to me. Right? Similar things to in religion. If all you have is one creation story and you get it from me, now I am the one arbiter. You have to go through me in order to get anything. So all of these different things are just different iterations of this, what's ultimately the same thing. Someone trying to say you have to go through me, there's no other way in order to do this. That's why you only know about my history. That's why you only know my creation story. That's why you only know this. That's why you only know that. Because if I can make sure that there are all these paths around, all these, junctions and intersections around, but the only path I am the way, I am the truth, I am the light, you have to go through me to get your salvation. I hope you're following along. So these are some of the things to think about, and also look at the motives of those who are doing this. Now, some of the insights that we get is that if we see what happened to Ogo, if we can see the methods that were used in order to deal with Ogo, this may also give us inspiration of how we can deal with those who are trying to be modern day Ogos, those who are trying to be modern day Urugus, and so forth and so on. So there are things to learn from that, because again, once we understand history works like this, we can say, well, what was done the last time someone tried to do this? What was done the time before that someone tried to do this? What was done? Now, if you are thinking that time is aligned, you can never see the similarity between this and that. No, we're so different, because then they didn't have cell phones. Even though every single thing that went into making the cell phone existed at that time. It was just, at that time, it looked like a rock. At that time, it looked like a leaf. Every single thing that went into this new technology existed way back then. From the time of Noah. Or we just transform it and make it look new to you, And then you can't see that this is just the same thing you saw before, just in a different form. So we'll see what happened the last time this type of process took place. So at the same time, Ogo was searching for the female twin and hence completeness, right? Ogo walked 28,800,000 steps inside Amma's womb in 60 periods. By this action, space and time were created. Once Ogo traveled this great journey, Ogo became more self-confident and challenged Amma, saying, Amma, I have seen the world that you created. Amma, now what's interesting is that they have quotes, direct quotes from the beginning of creation. Isn't that interesting? Who would you go to other than the oldest people on the planet to get direct quotes from creation? Amma responded to confuse Ogo, saying, as I have created, create neither in the sun nor in the shade. That's right out of Anansi's story. Ogo was sent to a western direction of the universe, in which 4 directions of space marked by 4 collarbones, clavicles. Think about Dikenga, right? This is exactly what we're talking about. So where you're coming from, what you're looking at is the cross. The significance of the cross goes beyond those who hijacked it, to make it their symbol. From here, Ogo stole the internal nerves of Amma's egg. This is the closest thing that we get to what we're talking about, genetic manipulation. Inside of the egg, you had these nerves. Ogo went in to steal those nerves in order to be able to recreate what Amma created. Ogo posed a threat to Amma, and Amma was worried Ogo might equal his/her creation and warned, that resembles the image I have created. Do not contest me. Then we have Ogo's first descent. Ogo defied Amma. As punishment, Amma removed part of Ogo's tongue. Ogo still possessed the word and hence knowledge that Amma had given him. However, loss of the tongue deprived Ogo of the means by which to utter the word. Isn't this interesting? It prevented the abuse of his power by wishing to equal Amma. Due to impatience, Ogo had been born prematurely and left the placenta with eyes still closed, and so remained in primordial darkness. And those who are in the sun become blacker, those who are in the dark become lighter. This is what you see on Dr. Marimba Ani's book, is Ogo depicted as these pale white Eurasians. Now we come to the formation of Earth. When Ogo left the placenta, the piece he tore off became an ark. In a bid to rectify the disorder brought by Ogo, Amma turned the ark into the earth. However, Ogo buried into the earth in search of the female twin, but this turned out to be a terrible deed of incest because the earth was made from Ogo's placenta and therefore was his mother. So when things go out of balance, now something has to be done. Sacrifice has to be done to restore balance. Ogo's penetration of the earth, therefore act of incest, led to the birth of deformed beings with large heads, frail limbs, and discolored bodies. Again, this is Dr. Marimba saying this is what we're dealing with when we're dealing with these whites who are still trying to do the same thing, equal Amma's creation. This incompleteness of these beings is a testament to Ogo's failure to equal Amma. This made the earth dry and sterile, bereft of creative potential. Now we come to Ogo's return to the sky. Ogo searched the earth for a female twin without success and returned to the sky. However, Amma was prepared for Ogo's return and commanded Ogo's brother to turn the placenta into a raging fire. And this was done at the moment Ogo grabbed hold to tear off another piece in search of the female twin. So Ogo is digging in, but now the earth, you have this fire. So the fire burned and shriveled Ogo's hand, transforming it into claws. In the process, Ogo was transformed into the pale fox, doomed to forever remain incomplete and to search in vain for the female twin. Morality of conduct as opposed to morality of essence or being, right? Remember we talked about that before. Ogo isn't evil in and of himself, but this is what were the behaviors that Ogo did. And again, you have this pale fox. And the idea that the pale fox is not evil is that it helps diviners in the sand divination, because they'll draw these things into the sand, and then based on where the pale fox steps, that's how they're able to interpret what is going to happen. So the sacrifice, this required the sacrifice and resurrection of Nomo Semi. To reorganize the universe, one of the male Nomo twins was sacrificed. The blood in the body was scattered throughout the universe, enabling Amma to reorganize and purify creation. This is like the story of Asar, whose body was chopped up and then distributed to the different gnomes. And then Aset had to bring them back together. After 5 days, pieces of the Nomo's dismembered body were put together. And again, we talked about this, the piecing of the body of Asar by Aset. The Nomo resurrected from death became the master of the universe, while other Nomo became ancestors of the Dogon. Again, this is something good coming out of something that seemed quite bad, right? The resurrected Nomo, and the ideas of the resurrected savior, this is something that you see in other plagiarized religions as well. The resurrected Nomo and ancestors were sent down to the earth in an ark and provided with everything to restore earth from lifelessness and barrenness to vitality. In the ark, every type of plant and animal were included, everything for human civilization. That may sound familiar to you as well. In the beginning, Amma created the sun. Now this is a different version. So all of that is coming from the book called The Pale Fox. This one is coming, and that had different Dogon informants. This is coming primarily from one informant named Ogotameli, and it's a different story that's related, but not the exact same. Now in this it says, in the beginning, Amma created the sun and moon like pots. The sun was white hot and surrounded by 8 rings of white copper. The stars came from pellets of clay squeezed in Amma's hand and flung into space. The clay spread out flat in different directions. Amma was lonely and united himself with a female earth, but was obstructed by a termite hill. So the termite hill is the masculine aspect of the earth. And Amma cut this and union took place, but interference made it defective, and a jackal was born instead of normal twins. That's the pale fox. This further successful unions between Amma and the earth, and this allowed twins to be born. They were half human, half serpents. Spirits were Nomo twins, made from the essence of Amma, life force of the world from which comes all motion and energy. That force is water and the Nomo exists. Now, when you look at this idea of the creation story and cutting the termite hill, this is why the Dogon say that they do female excision. The elder women excise the clitoris of the females. And then by the same token, because that's seen as the masculine aspect of the woman, then by the same token, the feminine aspect of the male is cut off. That's the foreskin. So in order to become a full male or a full female, that's why upon puberty, the feminine aspect is removed from you, the masculine aspect is removed from you, and then you perform your gender roles and functions in society.
But this thing, I don't know why people are saying it reduces it makes it very difficult for women when that spiritual is taken to have the feel of sex. And they don't feel so when you go to places like Sudan, Sudan, good for the women. So they don't really have the feeling. You can have sex with them, you don't feel anything. So what is happening is that there is no tendency for the woman to go in for Adam.
So that's the Arab reason for doing it. So what we've given is the African understanding that the masculine aspect of the woman is removed, the feminine aspect of the male is removed. That's one. Now, here you have other types of people, Eurasians, who are coming from an entirely different worldview, and now they're being exposed to African cultural practices without a full understanding of the worldview, the creation story, and these things. So the way that they understand the reasons why they do what they do are based on, we want our women to stay in a tent, we want them to wear hijab, we want them to be fully clothed, so forth and so on. None of that is related to why these African people who do that are doing what they're doing. You understand? So again, even if you see these people who have adopted a cultural practice, so you see like circumcision on temples in ancient Kemet. As a matter of fact, I can pull up an image of that. So it shows that once you reach puberty as a male, this is what you undergo. As a female, this is what you undergo. If you look at other, so-called religious traditions, a lot of them will do it at birth. So you have circumcision at birth, or excision at birth, or these types of things. This is counter to the idea of rites of passage, because that is the rites of passage that you encounter when you get to puberty, right? And then also, it's not all African people who do it. Like I mentioned before, the Akan don't do any type of circumcision or excision, because all of that is seen as a deformation. Now, nowadays they do, to the point where I mentioned this to a Fanti lady. She had never heard of this. I said, ask your grandmother. She went and asked her grandmother and said, yeah, my grandmother said it's true. That's why even to this day you can't go to the palace if you're circumcised. But before, it wasn't just the palace. This was something that wasn't done. That's just one of the places that have held on to that tradition. So again, you can find African people who are doing this, African people who are doing that. But again, these are different manifestations that are emanating from a similar worldview. But we'll continue. We're getting close to the end. We always try to finish the class so we can start fresh next time. So the force is water, and Nomo exists in all water. Nomo are water, but also emit light. But they are also light, and they emit it constantly. This is similar to Shu and Tefnut in the Kemetic accounts. Nomo looked down from heaven and saw Mother Earth naked and in disorder. So they covered her with a fiber skirt. Fibers were moist with essence of Nomo spirit. By means of this skirt, the earth obtained the rudiments of language. You can think about that as the first vegetation. The jackal, the deceitful firstborn, jealous of the mother's possession of language, the word, and knowledge of secrets of existence. The earth resisted the incestuous act and retreated into its own womb, the anthill or termite hill. The jackal managed to seize the mother's skirt, and through this able to reveal the plans of Amma to the diviner. So this is why they use a jackal in order to do divination. So you have again the idea of good coming out of something bad. The earth was, however, defiled by this incest. Amma decided to create living beings without her. Nomo, the guardians of natural order, saw the danger of twin birth disappearing, and drew a male and a female outline on the ground on top of each other. The man's female soul is removed by circumcision, and the woman's male soul is removed by excision to become fully become a man and a woman at initiation. So this is a completely different idea from you don't want the women to do this. In the case of you remove the women one, you also have to remove the male one, which is actually what was done in the Akan case, not doing either, because both of them have the exact same rationale. So if you want to rail against the female one, you also need to rail against the male one. However, they don't rail against the male one because white people do the male one, so therefore it's okay. I hope you follow.
Yeah.
But they both, in African worldview, have the exact same rationale. They're coming from the exact same creation story. The Fong creation story. In the beginning was Nanabuluku, an androgynous being out of whom came male, female, and male pair, Mau, Lisa. Mau, female, Lisa, male. The union of twins, the basis of the organization of the universe. The creator demi-earth was assisted by a semi-personal power named Da, at once as an instrument and conscious assistant in the work of ordering the world. Da, like Mau Lisa, contains both male and female principles. This organizing power, this force of life and motion, is sometimes described as the first being. Da has many incarnations, including the serpent, right? Da Aido Credo. While submerged in the ocean of the primeval waters, coiled around the unformed earth to hold it together. So where they start their creation story, or close to the start, is where Kemet ends its end story, and also where it started its beginning of creation. So the idea is, if you know how that began, you know how it will end. If you know how that one ends, you know how it will begin. The vastness of the ocean signified Da's greatness. Da, the continued sustainer of order and stability of the universe. While coiled around the earth, Da is continually moving in a spiral motion. just like the Dogon spiral motion, just like in the Akan gold weight in spiral motion. The motion identified with water and is the essential part of Da's essential being and cause the cosmos to be set into rotation. So anything that you see rotating is coming about because of this original serpent's rotation. So if you see the planets going around the sun, it's going in rotation. If you see electrons going around, the atom, the proton, you see these things. If you see the galaxy moving in a rotation, if you see the universe moving, some rotation, right? Whatever you see, there's some rotation. It just may be on such a huge scale that it looks like it's going in a line. But picture light. Now there's this ongoing thing of, is light a wave or is it a particle? Now we could ask the same question about the ocean. Is the ocean waves or is it particles? Now, if you look at the ocean, you have all these particles that come together in order to make waves. So the light itself, why can't it function like that? Lots of particles that come together to make waves, right? Because it has aspects of both. But then, when you look at light, it looks like it's traveling in a line. However, light can be bent. If you look at planets, if you look at the edge of planets, if you look at the moon, you can see how light that goes behind it can be bent slightly. Right? This is what actually goes on in several processes. Now, what we're getting at is if light can bend, this light that looks like it's going in a straight line, if we come out to infinite size, how do we know that that light isn't looking like it's going in a line, but eventually it curves? One tiny degree, and then it curves, and then it curves, and then eventually it comes back to be a huge Ikenga. Right? What I'm getting at is just, let's open our minds to greater aspects of, and then greater aspects of tininess, infinity there, infinity here. We might start seeing things much differently, even in terms of our conception of time, light, matter, energy, so forth and so on. So motion is identified with water. We mentioned that before. Da set up 4 iron pillars to support the sky at 4 ends of the earth, keeping the sky and waters below separated. Remember we talked about the clavicles, just like the Ikenga, right? These 4 pillars. The pillars coincide with 4 cardinal points, north, east, south, and west. Vodou sprang from Da, representing forces which act upon human beings. And the Igbo creation, the Nri version, the first man, Iri, and first woman, Namaku, were sent down from the sky by Chukwu. You find a lot of creation stories among the Akan like that. At the beginning, there was nothing but a great expanse of water, or a morass. Have we heard that before? Except for a primeval anthill that represents the male, an earth mound, on which Eri and Namaku are able to stand. Even in the Dogon, when that termite mound represents the masculine aspects that Amma has to get rid of before it can create. Eri complained to Chukwu about wetness all around. Chukwu sent an Auka, a blacksmith, to dry up the land. Namaku and Eri had children, Izinri, the firstborn. Eri fed by Chukwu, and food was fish from heaven called Azuigwe. When Eri died, the food supply stopped. Nri complained to Chukwu but was told to sacrifice and bury the eldest son and daughter in order to get food. Again, concepts of balance and reciprocity, you have to sacrifice before you get something back. And Nri refused, and Chukwu promised to send Joka from the sky to carve Ichi, facial scarification marks, on 2 children. After Joka arrived and cut Ichi on their faces, and Nri cut their throats and buried them in separate graves. 12 days later, shoots grew from the graves. From the grave of the sun, Nri dug up a yam, cooked and ate it, then fell into a deep sleep. The family thought he was dead, but he woke up and told the family what he had done. He dug up the yam, ate, and fell asleep. Nri dug up cocoa yam from the daughter's grave, Mankani. Yam is called son of Nri in Igbo, and cocoa yam is called daughter of Nri. That's the words for it. The event formally commemorated by marking Ichi on the faces of firstborn son and daughter. So the things you do now socially I'll trace back to what your creation story is. Now, if you don't know what your creation story is, can you do things socially based on it? What if you know someone else's creation story? Then you can do things socially based on what they tell you to do. You have to give me 10% of your money every month because my creation story says so. Or maybe a little after creation, then we justify it. But these are things that we have to start thinking about. The creation stories that you follow, they have implications to this day of what you do. What days do you rest on and what days do you work? What days do you go to farm? What days do you go fishing? What days do you do this? Everything you do now is dependent on what your concept of your creation is. But if you don't know it, I'll let you finish that sentence. Chukwu Oke Abiyama, the maker of everything, made the universe in two parts, Allah, the earth, and Igwe, the sky. Chukwu created two messengers, Anyangu, the sun, the eye of the sun, and you can compare that to the eye of Ra from ancient Kemet, right? We saw that in the video. And Onwa, the moon, and traveled back and forth bringing Chukwu the news of what was happening on earth. Remember that Atum sent out his all-seeing eye to retrieve back Shu and Tefnut when they got lost and what was left of Nun. This is illustrated with a diagram of a circle divided into 4 parts. The Kenga of the Bakongo showing paths of the sun and the moon. And I think I showed that to you at the end of last class. Right? So this is just like what we see in the Kenga, and it's arranged in the same way. Two more slides left. I appreciate your patience. If you know how to be patient, then you don't have a problem, because it's all transformation. You just wait to be transformed to something else. So the Igbo creation, Ibagwa version, illustrated with a diagram of a circle divided into 4 parts. You can see the Dikenga of the Bakongo showing the paths of the moon and the sun. Chukwu divided the universe into 4 parts corresponding with the 4 days of the week. And again, you find a lot of African people have 4 days in the week or 8 days in the week. 4 days in the week or 8 days in the week. The Yoruba also have 4 days in the week. Yeah.
So that means that they will have different days for a year.
Yeah.
And probably different months.
Yeah. So Chukwu divided the universe into 4 parts corresponding with the 4 days of the week. Urie, Afo, Nkwo, and Eke. For this reason, the number 4 is Nso, sacred. You can see also the Yoruba 4-day week, Ojo Rumila, or Ojo Ifa, Ojo Gun, Ojo Jakuta, also known as Ojo Shango, because those became conflated. Ojo Orishanla, or Ojo Abatala. In the Songye creation story of Congo DRC, you had Ifile Mukulu, the eldest, and Kulu is to be old in the Kikongo language as well. The eldest in the embodiment of both sexes, which brings into existence 8 children. You have Nguba, the sun, Mwenji, the moon, Inkenene, the star, Mema, water, Kapia, fire, Inkapa, wind, Nkongolo, rainbow, Kabia, Kamusongo, the earth, and no apparent order. But again, you have 8 children. We saw this in Dogon, we saw this in Kemet, we see 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. And chaos was seen as coming about from a dispute between Nguba, the sun, and Mwenji, the moon, over superiority. Ifile intervenes to mediate, and this began the second phase of cosmic development. And the dispute was resolved by redistributing a line of children according to specific duties, setting in motion evolutionary forces. And that's that. So I've gotten your, Ibrahim, I've gotten your text. I'll look it over. And again, the whole point is to show how the concepts, any concept, you can choose any of them. Dikenga, Songye creation, any of them. Human has multiple cells, in order to show how you can apply that concept as a conceptual framework in your own work. no matter what you're studying, you can do it. If this works, and I know it does because we invented thinking, it's just a matter of choosing to do so. This is analogous to this. That's your conceptual framework. That's all. That's all. Now you've come with a new way, a different perspective of how to see this thing that you're studying.
That will make our coming to do this course a good thing. Otherwise, we can be repeating what we do. That this will be the only different thing we do. Is that not the case?
But this is what I tried to tell some of your colleagues, but they didn't believe me.
I'm telling you, we told them and we are telling them.
Yeah.
That's, you know, that statement to me. That if you feel if you hadn't done this course, it's like not coming. And it was a surprise to them, and they will get to know if we all have our work done. That is when they will see the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they will
Because
see
you'll
that
understand concepts and theories.
different.
Different.
Differ. Even we will understand those that they are doing better than they do, because we are getting it from the crumbs.
Yeah.
We are getting it from around us. And we can create it from any angle. But they are doing what they really might not even know. It's more difficult.
This is, I think I told you, I won't share the name, but I told you there's a PhD student who's having this issue. In the introduction, this PhD student has mentioned conceptual frameworks. You don't see it anywhere else in the entire thesis. Chapters 1 through 4, you don't see it ever again. Because there's no understanding of how this concept relates to the rest of the work. It's just someone told me this is a theory, therefore let me mention it just so I can get kudos. You pat me on the back, give me my fans that I know the theory. And then I'm going to go back. In my village, they do this and this and this and this and this. You understand? So this is something that I think will be very rewarding because it gives you a different perspective, a different way of seeing these things. Yeah. So that's it for today.
Should we get the slides?
Yes, you can. They're all in that Dropbox folder, and I gave you all the slides. The one I gave to you is everything is in there. Now there will be some changes because anytime I teach the course right before the class, I have different ideas that I incorporate into them. Small.